Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to the Knights of Last Call. My name is Derek Melinda, and I am joined today by my esteemed colleague from the Patreon. It is Ben. Ben, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.
I see we have a few people here at the moment.
Yeah. Well, you know, it takes usually about 5 minutes, 10 minutes for the majority of people to come in. So, definitely. We'll give them a few minutes, but hello and howdy to you. How you doing, Ben?
Yeah, everything is good. Lots of games going on. I did, I think, 4 brand new game systems in the last week. So, yeah, good week.
It's a lot of gaming. As we were just talking about, you've probably done more gaming in the last couple of weeks than I have in the last couple of months. So you are definitely the most prestigious, the busiest gamer, I think.
Yeah, I've done, even for my standard, it was a bit much.
Right. So, yeah, but I mean, that's what's so cool about Ben being part of our Discord is that I mean, there's a lot of games. I don't think people fully. I mean, maybe some of the newer people. There's a lot of games that even made it to shows, which we basically got introduced from you. A lot of people assume that all this stuff flows from me, out to the Discord. I'm like, no, there's a lot of games that my own Discord had sort of, turned me on to and sort of said, hey, we want to play, this is awesome. This is great. And I get hyped. I get excited. And sometimes it's not always, sometimes I go, game's not for me. But sometimes I go, wow, this is awesome. And I definitely want to take a look. Root would be a great example of that. That made it all the way to an AP. And that was a game that you basically said, yeah, this is really cool. And there's some really interesting stuff happening there.
Well, they can't all be zingers.
Right.
But this one actually this is Goblins and Androids on our Discord. He was the person that kind of championed it early on. I knew about the game, but just never had a chance to look at it. And then he just broke me down, just kept mentioning it and talking about it. And I went, okay, let me see what the fuss is about. And I was about 10 pages in when I went, this has got some interesting ideas. And by 20 or 30 pages, I was like, yeah, this game is great.
Fantastic. Well, that is what we're going to do tonight. Tonight's a little bit of a unique twist. We're going to be doing a first look. This is a game that I have not played. I have not read. I don't know really anything about it. I just bought the PDF today. Word of warning to you folks out there. The PDF is available on DriveThruRPG, but it is in French. If you want to get the English PDF, you have to go to Modifiers. So to my knowledge, there isn't an English version on DriveThruRPG. And the reason I know that, and the reason why I said it's because I bought it in French. And I just assumed it would be in English. Maybe that's my Anglo privilege showing. But anyways, so if you're going to buy it, take it out from, go to Modifiers and get it from there.
And if you do order the hard copy through Modifiers, you will get the PDF for free.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Great. So, so I know nothing about this game. Ben was throwing his support to it. It had some people. It's been on our polls for a while now. And then Ben dropped a massive tip for the next first look. And I said, well, Ben, since you dropped it, you could pick it. That's what you chose to go with. So, so we're going to be taking a look at a first look. Now, again, this is a game I don't know. Ben, on the other hand, not only knows the game, he's running a game of it. He's running a campaign of it.
We've just started the campaign. And, so a couple of the interesting, as we go through the character creation and stuff, now that we've been through that process, we could talk a bit about it. But, yeah, we're just starting that campaign now. If it officially starts January 7th or something like that, but we've done the session 0 on the top down, and we've gone through character creation so far. So I haven't yet to actually run it in anger yet, but I have a couple of friends in France who I was talking to who played it last summer, and they all had very complimentary things to say about it. They are very dyed-in-the-wool 5e players, so their experience is a bit different than mine in terms of
where they're coming to it from.
Exactly. They're coming from a different place than where I'm coming from. So I like weird stuff. So to me, I saw this and thought it was really, really interesting. But we'll kind of get into it as we dig in a bit more. Awesome. But my opinion, this game does a lot of the same things that one of my absolute favorite games, which is Broken Compass or Outgun, does. It just does it differently. And you'll see when we start talking about the way it reinforces it. itself, and it reinforces the setting through the rules, reminded me a lot of Broken Compass, in the way that it handles some things, but it's mechanically very, very different, but it's good. It's good stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, so we're gonna get into that real quick. Let me just say some hello to some folks. We got Jackal here. He says, "What's up, Derek? What's up, Ben? What's up, Knights?" Thank you, Jackal. Mark throwing a little French shade, said, "French action adventure will be short steam as it will end in surrender." Justin, good evening to you. Elder Goblins, good evening. What's in your mug tonight? Well, tonight I have Diet Mountain Dew.
Yep, I'm drinking black tea.
There you go. Just caffeine, no,
Just straight up caffeine in a glass.
stimulants. Lance says air. I don't know for some odd reason. What's in your glass? Air. What's in your mug tonight? Air. Pathfinder PhD says, "Good evening, Derek, Ben, Knights. Hope everything is well. Look forward to some troubleshooting." Will is here. Christopher is here. Thaddeus is here. Glad that we got Ben back for the first look. Always good to have Ben on. Myber's stopping in and then stopping out. We'll check the VOD out. Ken says bonjour. Bonjour, Ken. Wojo is happy to catch one live. KC says, "Sup, friends? Art style looks like the Archie comics. What's this system about? Heists?" I'm going to say probably, or at least it's got to have a heist angle to it, because it definitely looks like there's some heist type shenanigans going on here. Patrick says, "I instantly get a French comic vibe from the art style as well." Derek wants to know, is this Ben's KLC debut? No, Derek. Ben has been on our show a number of times, talking about everything from horror games to his favorite systems to just, we've had him on for just random conversations as well. And Roman, hello. All right, so yeah, the first thing that jumps out to me when I open up this RPG is the cover and the art. It definitely has a certain style to it that I think is, a comic book style. It definitely has a European comic book style. It kind of reminds me of Archie or which isn't necessarily a European, but like Tintin or things like there's definitely a strong vibe to that. And if you didn't know it was European, there's a big Eiffel Tower in the background.
Yeah, I immediately thought of Lupin the Third.
Okay.
The anime when I saw the cover. That's what it reminded me of. This kind of like extreme forward momentum action kind of game that's going to be probably very Eurocentric, judging by the license plate on the car and the fact that Eiffel Tower is in the background. You see gendarme in the background and stuff like that. But I thought, wow, this just looks like Lupin the Third.
Yeah.
Lupin the Third. That's what it reminded me of.
And, you can see here on the cover, it says it's an action, and even the font, it's kind of got that Comic Sans font, an action adventure role-playing game. So again, it's not just a role-playing game, it's an action adventure role-playing game. So, and again, you mentioned, and if you want to go back into our live catalog, you can see us talking about Broken Compass, which is another game that Ben introduced to us, which is very much in that action adventure kind of pulp, kind of world trotting little adventure kind of type game. So, so very much in the same vibe there. And one of the things that jumps out to me right away is, because again, I had to grab the screenshot. So, I've seen a few pages. You gotta, when a graphic artist does an RPG, it's just like they know how to do it.
This game looks
they know how to do it so well.
Good. It is beautifully laid out. The way that it uses, instead of sidebars, these little comic frames on the sides to explain the game to you, but it's done in character of the game master talking to the players. It's just super well done.
Yeah, like even the second page here, which is kind of showing the sort of what I would call the iconics or the example characters, done as like a series of like Polaroids, of photo stills. Like I love it. Like it's just so. It's just so effusing with flavor there.
Oh, that's the other thing it's telling us. So it's also telling us this game is set in a specific time period. Black and white photos. It's vintage. If you look at the automobiles, they're of a certain vintage. And when we get into the game, we'll learn a little bit more. This is not meant to be played in the modern era.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. It definitely has sort of more of a 1960s, maybe 1950s vibe or something like that. All right, so the Troubleshooters comes out from Krister Sunderland, along with a bunch of other people who I do not know, I'm sad to say. But Krister was the project lead, the setting, and the rules design. So not saying it's entirely a stop shop, but this person is definitely the sort of overarching force behind this.
And I'm curious if he's done anything else using this particular game engine because it isn't named. Like this isn't like the Troubleshooters engine or anything like that, but it is a really, really good game engine. It is super clever and it has ideas that you can easily adapt into other games as well, which of course is another tick in its favor.
Right.
You can read it, even if you're not going to play this game, you can export some of the flavor at least into your game.
Yeah, and we could see here, I saw some people mentioning this in chat, but let me go to full page here. Here in this forward, there's, you can see that they're mentioning their inspiration from Tintin and Spirou, and I've seen people mention this in there as well. So definitely, and again, I this is to me where, I love when somebody is inspired by something and they say, I want to make a role-playing game that's going to allow you to experience that same sort of fun and adventure that comes from this, this genre, this style, this idea, this theme, and bring that to the game.
When I got about chapter 2 of this and I was like, I'm totally going to be running this, I started buying a lot of primary sources and watching a lot of primary sources as well from this time period that we can get into, like what are great like inspiration generators for plots and things from media as well. But once you start reading like the Ton comics and reading the other source material from here, which are certain like TV shows from that time period that he's trying to capture, specifically the idea of this jet set, globe-trotting adventure, Eurocentric kind of adventure stuff. During the early 1960s, there were a lot of media that featured this. It was kind of like right before James Bond really hit. And man, there's so much good stuff, and it just gives you tons and tons and tons of ideas. But yeah, very much, it hits a lot of those cultural touchstones. This game is not meant to be like the Tun the game or Spirou the game or the Man from U.N.C.L.E. the game, but it touches on a lot, or the Pink Panther even, but it really touches on a lot of those cultural touchstones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did see someone in chat up and said, what happened? I had my house painted, so actually I had to throw up my entire setup was completely destructed. I had to completely rebuild it, so I had to put back the camera and the light, so things might be a little bit different from positioning. And I still haven't refilled my bookshelves, so that is pending to be done. All right, so let's take a look here. We got, what's this game about? Again, you know me, I love it when a game comes out and it says, hey, look, I want to tell you about what this game is and give you the premise before you kind of buy into it. Then we have a chapter 3 is the cast. So what is it? And even just these titles here. What is a character? What makes a good character? What do the stats mean? A session 0, creating a team, creating a character, bring it all together. And it seems like it's a fairly short chapter.
They're very short, concise chapters.
Okay.
The bulk of like the heavy stuff is really the reference materials in the back.
Okay.
But the game itself is pretty breezy. The other thing I do want to point out real quick is while you're in the TOC, if you look at those frames that title each chapter, it walks you through a series of sessions that are played in-game. So each one of the chapter titles is the opening of that scene, and then every mechanic they describe in the game reinforces that artwork, and it has little artwork as you go through it that continues to tell the story. So, I mean, visually, it's just very, very strong. For a rule book, it's incredibly strong. For people who are like, I'm a visual learner, it tells you, it shows you as much as it tells you, I guess is what I'm driving at.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, I think visual and the layout and stuff like that really does make a difference here. Then we have a section, very short section on templates, which I don't know what that is, but we'll get to that. And then plot hooks. I mean, it's talking about this before it talks about skills, so clearly this is a game that cares about, like you said, buying into the story, going on these adventures. It's not just, the game has an agenda, that it wants to tell. Skills are a whopping 3 pages long. Oops, I clicked on the thing, went all the way to it. And then in the introduction here, there we go. Sorry. And then we have, okay, there we go. Sorry. Skills and abilities. Okay. Complications. Action scenes, fights, and combat, which is separate from actions. But again, combat section looks to be about 14 or 10 pages long.
It's very light on rules, but as you'll see when we get into it, there is quite a bit of nuanced granularity
Yeah.
to this game. But the fact that it uses a percentile, first of all, tells you that it really is very going to be granular. It's looking for those really fine differences in degrees of success, and it's going to be quite swingy because you're going to have 100 outcomes from every die roll. So it's swingy, but how does it kind of rein in that swinginess? How does it work? But it has so much variety within that it on the surface it looks very simple, and it is, but it has a lot of nice crunch to it as well, but crunch in all the right spots. It's pretty interesting.
All right. We see a section on story points, which my initial thought process is some sort of hero point or fate point, but we'll see.
There are multiple meta currencies in this game.
Okay.
Multiple.
Okay. Equipment, and then after the adventure, and then we get into the world of Troubleshooters. So, after, about 100 plus pages, you're pretty much through the rules, it seems like, and we're into the world. And this is where you're talking about, and again, you got to love it, right? Like a book that's going to help you actually run games. And it's, it's talking about here, the world of the Troubleshooters, it's this kind of alternate Cold War era, like you said, sort of a variation of that James Bond kind of mystique. And, we could see here like a French flag and a Japanese flag on the moon, so alternate histories like that, I think are a lot of fun. And it's a great way to sort of use resonance. You could take something that happened in real life and just spin it and repurpose it and have something fun, and like it turns out that, the moon landing, like Apollo 11's going on in the background or something, or one of the Gemini or Mercury missions is happening in the background, but your group is trying to stop the spot, the Russians from sabotaging the rocket or something.
Yeah. And this game comes baked in with the default criminal organization.
Of course.
You're to overcome.
Your Spectre or whatever.
It is very much Spectre.
Yeah. Okay. So here we go. So then we get to the director. What's your job? Interesting. There's a section here on comedy. That's interesting. Okay. The Octopus. Okay. So this is clearly our evil organization. Fantastic. And then a section, or I guess you would call it a bestiary, but the threat files. And then lastly, we end up with appendices, including calendar, 1965. So like we talked, time and a place, boom, very, very laid out there. Patrick wants to know, Ben, why are you doing this to me? I don't need another game.
Yes, you do, Patrick. Yes, you do.
Introduction. So you may have noticed it's not a comic book. It's a tabletop role-playing game. If you haven't been this before, yada, yada.
At first, when I first read this chapter, I did get a little bit of, man, every page, it seems like they're reinforcing the fact that it's not a comic. But I do wonder, outside of our market here, if people saw this book and didn't think it was a type of comic, because if you just look at the cover, it looks like a comic from the 1960s.
Sure.
So I kind of get where they're coming from, because it has a lot of pop art and stuff. But this bit got a little bit like, it's aimed at noobs. I would say
it's a little bit papers and pencils and
yes. Bring your pencil.
Bring your pencils. Don't forget a pencil. But I do like, again, using, though, even though it's reminding you it's not a comic book. Compared to most of the role-playing games that we look at, it already looks a fucking lot like a comic book. It's got speech bubbles and this cool layout, and she's introducing herself. But I like this because you get this introduction to this character. Okay, she's talking about she's a professional race car driver. She's this, this diva black woman from the 60s, who's racing high-speed vehicles. But then what's kind of interesting, kind of like leans you into it. I thought this was really interesting as soon as I saw this. They've got her, you don't even know the mechanics yet, but they're like, but here's her stat block. Here's her skills. So you can kind of start to, because we see that art, we see her little speech bubbles, and we kind of start to figure out, we kind of know who she is, right? She's Foxy Cleopatra from Austin Powers. But
exactly. And a lot of games are like in the trad RPG world, it is, what is an RPG? And then they go through this like character creation process without telling you the rules beforehand. This is like, well, this is what it looks like. Let's start picking it apart straight away. Like, what is she good at? What do these numbers mean? She's a vitality of 5. What does that mean? Well, we can assume what vitality means.
Right. But at least we know that is a concept. One of the things I always tell people is, and to be clear, more newer games, and when I say newer, I mean like in the last 5 to 10 years, like board games have started getting better at this. But old board games, I always told people I teach them backwards. I would say, this is what you need to do to win. This is what, is a win condition. And people will naturally go, well, how do I get those? And you're like, great question. I'm going to introduce you. Because if I just start telling you the mechanics, and you go, but why do I care about this? Like, why would I ever want to do this? I have no context for it. So you can see here, assuming you've never even played a role-playing game before, you can kind of get a sense for, okay, I see these skills. Vehicles is at 75%. That sounds very high in the context of the rest of these games. She has these abilities like born behind the wheel, been everywhere. And right off the bat, I thought, abilities mean, strength, dex, con, int. But I see strength is a skill and abilities look like more like aspects or traits. So, this is kind of putting me into complications. Overconfident. Okay, got it. Languages. Okay. What's her plot hook? Media darling. And so again, you start to sort of put it together just by looking at this one page. And then, so they have a variety. It looks like the characters from the cover, basically. And again, here's like a journalist from Japan. She's a judo black belt, and she's noticing very good at noticing small details. And then you look at
so this is also telling you like what would be a good party composition without telling you what would be a good party composition.
Right. They're basically saying like, look, you have a bunch of different people in your troubleshooters.
Because in skill-based games, I've said this before, where I don't think skill-based games favor generalists, and as soon as they play a skill-based game, almost always try to make a generalist, and they generally suck at everything. You really have to like choose a specialization in these kinds of games, and this is telling you, if you're going that route, how many people you think you might need to do this, and if you have fewer players, how are you going to covering those gaps that might be missing? Right.
So here's your rogue with a heart of gold, your thief, Paul Marchand, and Harry Fitzroy. And again, it's pretty, complications. Honest, drunkard.
Yeah, you will see that some of the language in this game and some of the things like the drunkard complication, this isn't for kids. This isn't really aimed at small, even though art might look like it's for small children. I think maybe that's why they also are saying this is not a comic, because it's very much a European book. Like, it has language in here that would not appear in a mainstream American RPG.
For example, if we scroll back up to Eureka, she's talking about her skill with judo, and it says, more than one intoxicated fondler has taken a short involuntary flight into the Seine.
Yeah.
So, definitely, putting in its time. But again, also too, regardless of its timing, this book is out of Europe, and they're a little bit more, I don't know how to, they're a little bit
puritanical.
Less puritanical. That's probably the best way I could say it. So here's Eloise, and then there's Graf von That's such a great name. Graf von Zadriff. Number 2. Oh, he's a number 2, not number 1. That's hidden behind the thing. So and I look at even the introduction here. And I warn you to not take part in their adventures and become one of the Troubleshooters.
Oh yeah, you could just hear the music kicking in when they do that.
You could totally hear this. Like, look, it's just this beautiful 2-page spread. It's like, I mean, that opening part was literally sort of like the pre-roll, and then you kind of went into the main action sequence.
It reminds you like the Italian Job, the remake of the Italian Job.
Yeah. So
when in the beginning it walks you through each of the characters before the titles start rolling. It sets up a little vignette of all the characters, and you can see what they do, and they have your little spotlight moment, and then it shows them all together.
So again, but I'm always torn though, because these are books, and we're supposed to enjoy reading them, but they're also reference manuals. So it's always kind of like this, like, how much art and how much hand holding do you want versus make this thing something that's just about being usable at the game table. So we got information here, and they're kind of explaining how this works. It looks like we're going to have little comic book bubbles telling us how the game works. Sidetracks boxes are in blue for sort of call outs, which is great. Very clear direction there. And then it tells us how to read the book. So the first part is rules, procedures, and stats of a role-playing game. The next part's how to make a character. And the third part is about procedures, how to handle actions and fights, how to influence the story using story points, and how to advance your character and what you'll do between sessions. Lastly, the fourth part of the book is essentially for the director of operations, the director, the game master. And again, this is a role-playing game, but we kind of already just touched on this.
Yeah, they lay off the gas on this stuff after this chapter. Like
All right.
just this introductory material is very like, remember, this is not a comic book. This is a game. It's played with paper and pencil, and they kind of say that at each turn, which to me, even when I was talking about it in the discussion thread on the Discord, I was like, it was a bit much for me in the beginning. But then once you get past that, it lightens up.
So, I think this is something that I think a lot of games could use and should use. Okay, even games that are more "quote unquote" advanced. So we get to here. How does this work? As you know, as we stated earlier, the game is played as a conversation, which is obviously very PBTA-esque language. And they give this setup in the example they've been tracking down. I love these kind of examples of play. I mean, they don't necessarily all need cute little comic art book characters with speech bubbles. Although I do think that this makes it a lot more interesting and more fun to read than like the kind of just 2-column text of player stuff. Because I think a lot of people they're like, show me how this is supposed to look, and I think that's really important. Because again, it kind of, it highlights what a flow of the game is supposed to look like. Any case, so they're talking, and then we see that the GM is asking for a drive test check down 2 pips because of the conditions. Look at that, a 66 story and a success and good karma, and a story point to me and an experience check. So we're getting kind of a preview of some of
all the buzzwords.
Yeah, and they're
various mechanics are in there,
and they're in bold. They're very clearly trying to say like these are mechanics that we're going to kind of teach you later. So blah blah blah, sneak check. So again, really cool examples of play here. So we'll get into that. And that's a pretty lengthy example of play. All right. So what happens next? It's up for you to define, right? So how do I start? All right. The paradigm of the game. Okay. This is a role-playing game about action, adventure, and mystery in a fictional European 1960s, 1970s setting in the style of mainly Belgian and French comics, known as bande dessinée. Disney. I don't know how to pronounce that. Or BD. BD. How do I do? I don't even speak
Fine,
French.
I guess.
All right. If you have not read Belgian or French comics, do not despair. This game is inspired by them, but not based on them. And that's kind of like what you were talking about. BD, says Patrick. Okay. There's a certain paradigm of the game that's actually pretty easy to understand. This isn't just in blue, it's in orange. The Troubleshooters is about good friends, competent in their fields of expertise, who have fun, excited, light-hearted adventures together in Europe and other exotic locations.
So I will say this, of the touchstones that they do for primary sources, I've read a lot of ton since I picked up this book, and that is probably maybe an extreme example of what this game is trying to do. But for primary sources, I would highly recommend, there was a television show in the early 60s in the BBC. You can watch it on Amazon Prime, called The Saint. It predated Bond, and it starred Roger Moore, and he played a jet set gentleman vigilante thief guy. And every episode he's in Rome, then he's in London, then he's in New York, then he's in Miami, then he's in Paris. And this is very much in that vein. Like, it borrows a lot from that style of storytelling. And another show called The Rogues, which I would recommend, starring young David Niven, middle-aged David Niven, 1960s, about a group of like leverage-esque grifters, but they're also very jet set, and their setup is kind of like a family. Like, an older woman is like the head of the gang, but they could refer to her as their mother, but you don't really know if they're ever really related. The characters are related. It's just they refer to each other in a very familial way. And it very much has the same kind of a thing. They don't take it like campy. None of these stories are campy. They take it really serious, but they're never in any real danger. You're watching to see how they get out of these situations, and they're all hyper competent.
Right.
It's just a lot of fun to watch. Like, what are the settings? Yeah. How do they use the place they're in as part of the actual storytelling is really, really good.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not as familiar with that, but I mean, I grew up in the 80s, so like I grew up from the shows from the 70s, like, in the 80s, like A-Team and Charlie's Angels, and like that same kind of like, a band of, and you mentioned Leverage, right, being the modern equivalent of that.
Yeah, I would say if you're familiar with shows in the 80s, if you ever watched Remington Steele.
Sure, with Pierce Brosnan.
Yes, and
also
Stephanie Zimbalist. yes, and you can see when you're watching that show, you could set it in this time period to be the same thing. Here's a woman, she writes a fictional character, opens up a detective agency based off of someone who doesn't really exist. And here you have this like kind of like he's the face, but he doesn't really have the skills, but he does have his own skill set. It's just he's a grifter. And then you have the woman who is like behind the scenes who has the actual skills monkey. That would work perfectly in this game as a setup.
So again, this is the game telling you, what is this game about? Well, this game's about adventure. All right, we're going to be going all over the world. There will be dangers and challenges, but through smart thinking and teamwork, you'll overcome them. Action, car chases, fisticuffs, shootouts. It has heists and daring stunts. And again, but very clear, it is not deadly or gritty. This game does not want your character to die unless that's what you want or you do something really stupid.
Yeah, and those examples are put in. Like, what would be an example as a GM, like where you go, all right, enough's enough.
Right. You're almost like you're asking for it. But
yes,
in fact, being taken prisoner is a staple of the genre, right? And I mean, again, that's what you see all the time. When the heroes lose, they wake up in the villain's clutches,
Yeah, and it gives them an opportunity to be on the inside, to bust their way out and to topple them from inside or to learn information. Yeah, it's such a critical part of that type of story, and it's hard for certain gamers to understand that. Yes, you're supposed to lose this encounter.
And we mentioned this on a stream a long time ago, but I said, if more players, and not just the whole party, but maybe even the whole party, but if more characters or players, but maybe even the whole party got captured, I was going, even in your standard D&D type game, I said, ironically, you would have a much easier and better source for those social skills that everyone's always talking about, and for actually getting to know the villain right before you actually inevitably kill them at the end of the adventure module and find their diary and then advance. You wouldn't have to. You would know their plan because, of course, they're going to monologue to you, and you have this moment to sort of have this rapport with them. And I think that's
the chatty guards, or I'm sure in this kind of setting, the villain would be like, well, we don't want to kill you unless we have to. So, and you're clearly some kind of rogue, otherwise you wouldn't have broken into my place in the first place. So, What is your price? How much do you want for your silence, or whatever the case may be? Like, there's usually some type of scene of bargaining, and then the heroes like reverse that and like work it. It all works out to their advantage in the end.
Right. Or it's, do you expect me to talk? No, I expect you to die. And then I'm going to conduct this extremely
Please wait while I walk outside now and leave you to escape.
Exactly. Competent cast. The players are beyond the norm. They are often jack of all trade sorts that can hold their own in many different areas, as well as competent specialists in their own fields. They may have exotic origins or specialize in exotic fields or trades, but above all, they embrace adventure. Although considerably above average, they are also not superheroes. The story may stretch their feats a bit, but it's more of an exaggeration of the real than something unreal or impossible. The unreal and impossible is left for superhero comics. So very clearly saying you are a cut above the ordinary people, but nothing that you do is fantastical or superheroic. Fun and friendship. This is not a grimdark or even a dark game. The colors are bright, the tone is light, it's full of humor, jokes, and gags. There's not much room for intrigue and enmity amongst the players' characters beyond friendly competition. They are friends working together towards a common goal. In the past, when it was better. This is set between an alternate 1960s and 1970s. It's been a few decades since the war, and Europe has recovered. It's an era of glamour, optimism, and technological advances. Everyone can afford a car and drive wherever they want. Jumbo passenger jets. You can even call someone through transatlantic cables. And even people are even reaching for the moon. And, far from perfect. Iron Curtain, less equality between the sexes, fight for civil liberties, etc., and crime. Eurocentric and metropolitan. It is international game. It's focused on Europe. It is from castles in the Rhine to villages in the Alps to casinos in the Riviera.
You have to have your Monte Carlo casino scene.
Of course. Which is, I think, a lot of fun there as well. And then lastly, international cooperation is very much in vogue, right? And you saw that in the iconic characters. There was the Swedish character and the French character and the, from all over the place, the German character. So that's fantastic. But international teams of characters are not only possible in the Troubleshooters, they are encouraged. It's a great way of adding some cultural diversity to a group and may make some adventures even easier. Basic stuff here: respect the players, respect the limelight, aka the spotlight, respect the flow, be prepared, right? How do you be a good player? There you go. Take this. Respect the GM, respect your fellow players, respect the flow or the pacing of the game, respect the spotlight, and know your shit and know how your character works. There you go. Somebody asked, well, haven't you never done how to be a good player? There you go. That's it. The 5 things that you need to do. Dice. Okay, we're going to be using deep percentage dice here. And a pool of, okay, so it's D percentage and a pool of 6-siders. Okay. You'll need.
Yeah, here's where we start seeing there's a little bit more under the hood
Okay.
than you would think.
So we'll need at least half a dozen, so not too many. Six-sided dice maybe. Ordinary dice will do, but there are custom dice for the troubleshooters that have a circle on the 4 and 5s and an explosion symbol on the 6. So I'm assuming it's kind of looks like Burning Wheel, where like 4, 5s, and 6s are successes, but 6s can explode.
Yeah, there are actually 3 different dice pools
Okay.
for the D6s that this game uses. Yeah, but that's one of them. One of them is exploding.
I got it. And so we can see ND6, number of N-sided dice, NDP, pool of N-sided dice 6 for soak rolls, and then NDX, a pool of N exploding 6 dice pools. So
yeah, so your just 3d6 would be you'd roll 3, you'd add them together, so you're doing the total. The pool is you're rolling and you're looking for 4-ups for number of degrees of success, and then exploding, which is usually like firearms and things like that.
Yeah.
If you roll a 6, you re-roll that die, and they explode, and it gets added as well towards the amount of damage that you're doing.
And then we learn how to roll D percentage, which I think most of us know how to run this. But sometimes the D percentage roll can be flipped, because then instead of a 73, a 70 and a 3 is 37. So we can do the flipperoo. And I know we've been talking about how some D100 games have been doing that lately with the flipperoo to kind of like get 2 results out of 1 die roll.
Yeah, Zweihander does it as well. The idea of it's a failure, but then you can turn it into a type of success, or vice versa, which I think is really cool.
Anytime you can get multiple, every time you can get multiple lifts out of a single die roll, I think it's pretty cool tech.
Yes. And it's funny because you actually have multiple ways of flipping. So depending on how many resources the GM has to hand and the situation, and how many resources the player has to hand, you're like judo flipping, but you could keep judo flipping even a single die roll to squeak out like this massive narrative that you'd get from a single die roll, because as you're flipping, you're also telling the story as the player's like, well, I'm going to spend 2 story points to do this. Be like, well, I'm going to bring in your complication. I'm going to flip it back. And you're telling the story like, well, I'm going to do something else and flip it back again. It creates this incredible flow with the dice, the way it works in this game. It reminds me a lot of Broken Compass, where it's like fast and furious with the die rolling and adjudicating it, but also reminds me a lot of just old board games, like the fun of those board games when you were a kid, where you're just rolling a bunch of dice and being like, well, this means this. And then someone goes, well, I have this widget that changes it. And you're like, well, I have a widget that changes it back. And that kind of like tag back and forth, you don't really see in RPGs. Most times it's player rolls, GM adjudicates, player invokes some kind of meta currency over.
Yeah.
That's it. But this game is trying to make these complications happen to make it an interesting story where your success isn't necessarily the desired outcome. So how far down the line is everyone willing to go in terms of burning their resources to get the outcome that they personally want to get out of this one roll? It's really, really clean. I mean, the design of this is clean, but this does get a little confusing, all the different die pools.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's always still using D6s, and I think that's the most important part here as well. It doesn't look like it has come through yet, but Alternate GM did send in a super chat for $4. Thank you, Alternate GM. Just says GG to us with a nice little sticker there. Thank you, Alternate GM. He was excited for Ben and Derek to be on the show. Thank you, Alternate GM. Thank you so much. So yeah, here we go, a description of 3D6, and you can see some of these custom dice here that Ben was talking about with the circles, the sort of reticle on the 4s and the 5s, and the explosion on the 6. So in a normal die roll, you're just paying attention to the numbers, you're adding them up. On the other hand, if you roll a damage roll, then you're going to re-roll those keep re-rolling those 6s, and you're looking for 4s, 5s, and 6s, which is where those symbols come up as well. And we can see here that soak rolls talk about vitality. So vitality looks like that is your hit points. So you don't need the custom dice, but they're pretty cool looking. They look exciting. They look
expensive. The dice look beautiful.
Yeah.
They're totally not necessary. But
totally, but cool. You gotta love them. And then cool. Here's a term of terms and conditions, and kind of maybe not necessarily explaining the rules mechanic of them, but just sort of so that as we start talking about these, you have a understanding of them, so we can see a bunch of these. Now we're not going to go through all these, but it's pretty cool that they put this in here. All right, so here's our cast of characters. And again, we have a nice little, introduction here from a character. Now that we know now that you know who we are, it's time to talk about who you are, what you're good at, what are your dreams are, who are your friends, and how it'll function with the group. So what is a character? Your character is the means by which you, the player, interact with the experiences in the setting. It is your role, your vessel through which you contribute to the creation of a common story. Your character has two components: the game stats in the passport, which are used with the rules to determine the direction of the story, and the description, which could consist of all kinds of things, such as a character's portrait, background, description of their appearance, journals chronicling their adventure. The combination of story and game stats is your character, and through it you will act and participate in the Troubleshooters.
And it's worth noting the character sheet in this game is a literal passport,
Yes.
which we could say here.
Yeah.
It is sweet. It's like, once again, just the graphic design, the way that they are immersing you in this idea of like, well, if it's a passport, what is that telling you about the game? We're going to be traveling a lot. We're going to be going to all these different exotic locales throughout Europe, and you need a passport to do that. And I love the fact the character sheet looks like a legit passport. It's just such a nice touch.
Yeah, and again, these kind of resonance touch points are fun. And we were just talking about we were talking in the Discord about VTTs and stuff, and a lot of people were just like, "Oh, I just use a shared Google Sheet," and I said, I don't like doing that. I get that it's totally functional, but man, there's something about the aesthetic quality to a game, to the character sheets that has always mattered to me.
Oh yeah, when I was running my 1E campaign, a lot of players, there was like 25 players in that campaign. A lot of players use Excel spreadsheets because the game almost requires that level of detail for the weight carried and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But man, I loved my favorites are the ones that were just like some dude just took a photograph of like a printout sheet with pencil written on it, and it's like, yeah, man. So he's like, this is like he's living through this character sheet, and it's there's that kind of a dissociation, I think, that happens when you have a digital character sheet or a spreadsheet versus a handwritten sheet. I truly believe that there's like a layer of disassociation that happens there. For me,
I think so. For me, big time. I mean, for me, that's a huge deal for sure. I'm the same way. So what makes a good character? All right, so this is kind of an interesting thing you don't usually see, so I'm kind of paying attention to it. It is not a game of intrigue and conspiracy. It's a game of fun, friendship, and adventure. While tension between the characters is good drama, it's not the kind of drama that the Troubleshooters aims for. If you prefer it, by all means, go ahead and play the game that way. However, the game is designed around the idea of a group of friends helping each other and cooperating to achieve a common goal. In this mode, tension between the characters is just there to spice things up and to differentiate the characters, not drive the story. It's setting fluff. It's not the main gist of it.
In this game, you wouldn't have like a doppelganger or body double as one of the characters, for example.
Right. Or just someone who is secretly a spy for the other side.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah. That would not happen. It just doesn't do that. But what I do like about that, and it also kind of your opinion, and it's like, boom, what makes a good character? Just like right out in the front, just says it, and it's telling you, yeah, you could play this game wrong.
Yes,
so,
right. It's very like Luke Crane-esque,
Yes.
like I wrote this game, and if you are making a character that doesn't do this, I don't care. This isn't your. I'm going not to get off on a soapbox here, but it's like RPGs I can do whatever I want with them, and they are my blank canvas, and I can just rip apart this game and use however I want. I mean, yes, technically you could do that, but you're not doing it right. Like this is a game about what this person designed this game for.
Yeah, the way this is approached, it reminds me a lot of Burning Wheel.
Yeah.
The way it's described, not quite the same language, but a lot of the similar ideas. It's built to do a thing, and it just says, This is how it does that thing. If we're not held responsible if you jump off the rails on this, because you're not going to get the same gameplay experience.
Right. Anand says the passports are even available on Amazon. Yeah, that reminds me, because again, D&D doesn't say it's for this particular type of experience, but you see all these people going like, oh, my 5e game sucks because I'm running it as this like, sci-fi intrigue, pulp noir game. And you're like, and it's just the short, it's like, well, of course those things aren't operating within the context of your game because you're completely off the reservation here. But it says a good character in Troubleshooters is competent and can do her job, does not replace any other character, but brings something new and unique to the group, has plenty of reasons to get involved in adventures, sometimes willingly, but even kicking and screaming will do, allows for character growth, has weaknesses that can enhance the story, is fun to interact with, and most importantly, is fun to play. So, not saying that you basically no edgelords here, your character should, be someone that's fun and funny and, fun for you.
I am curious,
fun for
when you
else.
see how complications work, I will be really curious to see what you think of this particular mechanic. I think it's very interesting and bold, but I mean, I haven't played with it yet, so I don't know for sure, but it's a thing. Like, man, it's like, I don't know any other game that rewards you quite the same way as this game does with the complications. It's very interesting.
Anand says that the passports are even available on Amazon, so you can go ahead and order them. So that's pretty cool.
Which is good. If you're playing online, for example, with people, but you're using physical media, it's nice to know that everyone locally can get one. Instead of like the GM having to get them and like mail them to people, everyone could just get it local to them and can still play the game.
All right, so the core game stats are skills and max vitality. These allow you to perform actions and take hits. In addition, there are story mechanisms, stats, plot hooks, traits, abilities, complication, and story points that allow you to influence the way events unfold. Finally, there are tags, especially on equipment, that define their special characteristic in game terms. Protective gear also have a protection stat, and weapons have a damage stat. Okay? So, skills and max vitality, we can kind of have an analog to that. Skills look like a D percentage. There might be some, thing to that, but max vitality, some form of hit point. But let's talk about plot hooks. Plot hooks are used to get your character into adventures. They help define each character's motivations. There's a list of 11 possible plot hooks, and each character will have one or two. Adventure modules will have startup handouts for 4 to 6 of the plot hooks, and the director will use 1 or 2 of them to start the adventure. The other players are encouraged to play it up and help make the plot hook characters feel, oh, okay. So it's like kind of like saying, this is kind of your adventure.
Yeah, this 2 or 3 sessions is your little story arc.
Yeah, okay. I like that. So plot hooks could be used for homebrew adventures as well. But it's kind of an interesting way of sort of saying like, this one's everyone's here, but let's focus on this character. We're going back to their home, their hometown and the life of crime that they left behind, and now we're dealing with the criminal organization that they used to be a part of, right? And it's like it's like that kind of focus episode, which is cool, which is just a fun way to do that, and again to sort of emulate that genre. Skills are measured on a percentile scale. The lowest value is 15. Theoretically, the highest you could have is 106. The highest starting value is 85. To make a task check, you try to roll lower than or equal to your skill check in order to succeed. In an opposed check, you also want to roll higher than your opponent's roll, so under but higher. It's kind of blackjack, right? For opposed rolls. The outcome of task checks are binary. You succeed or you don't, or in the case of opposed checks, you win or you don't. But it is good to regard higher rolls as better or more successful than lower ones, even if there is no specific rule saying this. That way, you get a little extra bit of extra input when narrating the outcome, plus you train yourself to handle opposed checks. So it's kind of a side there. So fundamentally, it is a pass-fail system.
Yes.
But it is saying that like you should play up a higher roll differently than you would play. I passed with a 72 instead of versus I passed with an 18.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I don't mind it. I like the idea of you're giving the players, once again, I'm not sure who the intended audience of this game is, but I have a feeling it is for people that might be new to this kind of game.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that the game gives the players license to go ham. I hate to mention this, but Chubos, for example, gives people XP for emoting, for you ham it up, you get XP. I ham up by response, I get XP for that.
I'm emoting disdain right now.
Yeah, everyone hams it up, they get XP for that. This game isn't giving you XP for it, but it is saying, you know, if you roll really good, figure out a way to explain that in the fiction. And if you roll really poorly, figure out a way to explain that in the fiction. And the bigger the number, the more bigger the outcome. I really like that because you're trying to roll low. It's almost like if you roll really low, it's something that your characters is like, I'm going to pick this lock. Okay, great. And I rolled a 4. Oh, that's an amazing roll. Whereas in a game like Call of Cthulhu, it's like, that's an extreme success. Woo, that was amazing. Whereas in this game, it goes, I rolled a 4, and they go, well, for you, it was just like, you just walked in. Like, it was not a challenge. But if you're rolling closer to the edge of your limit of your ability or above, that's a big dramatic moment. Like you're turning those bigger numbers into bigger dramatic moments. And it's a way to work in that narrative structure. You know, you're going to have your highs and lows, and because it's depercentile, it's going to be a very wide range.
So as sort of an aside here, you know, there's some D100 systems, and I know Broken Empires from Trevor, from Me, Myself, and Die, is using this from kind of cribbed from the Warhammer Fantasy game, but using the Delta Green blackjack system, where the tens digit becomes this idea of success levels, right? So you still have to pass, but you know, if you pass if your skill is 80 and you roll a 19, well, then you succeeded, but you only got 1 success level. But if you roll a 70 or a 72, then you got 7 success levels. So, right. So getting high, but not going over your skill is ideal. You know, but then it kind of compartmentalizes and discretes the level from this sort of more of a role-playing thing to a more, you now have 7 effect levels to spend. You now have, 5. Do you think that is a good, kind of independent from this game, but do you think mechanizing or adding, degrees of success to a BRP style role is a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it is a very gamist thing.
Sure.
I am not a huge fan of gamist design personally, so I see the need for it. I think it's fun. It's got a little bit of the bigger numbers go burr kind of
it absolutely does that.
To it, which is cool. And I think for certain type of game or a certain type of game, it reinforces that narrative a little bit. Like it's telling you where to get excited. Yeah. I find that D20 is by far the most blandest of all because it's so binary with the pass and fail. It's just, all right, it has AC of 12. I rolled a 13. I rolled an 11, but I had a +4. All right, well, you got a 14. That's a hit. All right, moving on. It doesn't say, it doesn't have that same degree, nuance because you can't really do it with a D20. Right. But you really can do it with percentile. We have 100 outcomes. You can really dial in those degrees of success. And also, I think helps kind of, because you mostly will see this with percentile games. And I think the reason why is because now you kind of almost have to band the success levels. Sure. And when you use it with a D6, which is not really swingy at all, you only have 6 outcomes. And if you're rolling 2 of them, you're going to start getting a bell curve. And already you're kind of pushing towards the median. You can't really do it with a percentile game. No. The dice are going to do what they're going to do. And this kind of tells you how excited to be or not be. So I don't mind it per se in this context. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's good. It kind of depends on the circumstance. Do I like the degree of success thing? The reason I'm not a huge fan of that particular mechanic personally, which you see in Warhammer and which you see in Broken Empires and a couple other games, is it just creates one extra moment of math. Yes. Absolutely. That I'm not a big fan of. And that's totally fine. I mean, you do pay for that in the resolution mechanic. The only reason I bring it up is because I know that, like, your point is correct about D&D, you need a 14 to hit. You got a 15. You got a 19. Most people, I don't know many tables, GMs or players, who really fundamentally describe that any differently. Unless you're getting to a critical hit, most people are just like, okay, you hit them and, you pick the lock or you jump the jump. Like there's no effort to sort of say, but you rolled a 21 instead of a 16,
but that doesn't actually impact the game.
Yeah, I've never seen a DM have a table that goes, if you got over the AC or the DC by 1, that is, this kind of success.
Right.
And 2 means like you crushed it and you get some kind of benefit for.
Well, right, because
doing
inevitably, if you do that, people go, okay, so do I get do I do bonus damage here?
Oh, yeah.
What am I looking for? All right, so next to each skill value is an improvement checkbox. Check this when you use the skill in a meaningful way. You don't have to succeed or even actually make the task check, just so long as the attempt moves the plot forward. However, if you use the skill just to put a check mark in the checkbox, you don't get the improvement check. You can only have 1 check per skill at any given time. So this is very reminiscent of Dragonbane, which does this, where basically if you use a skill and you use it in a meaningful way, if you roll a 1 or a 20, you get to checkbox it and then potentially advance it at the end of the session. Torchbearer does this, right? Where if you use a skill, pass or fail, you get to mark it and potentially advance that. So I love that. It's kind of diegetic. It's, use a skill, get better with it, and it definitely encourages you, I think, to use skills that you might not otherwise be the best at in some ways.
Yes, although it does say if you're using it just to use it, you don't get to count it.
Well, but I think I mean, clearly there's a situation where it's like, I picked the lock. You're like, you're not even trying to go through that door. Like, okay, like that's one thing,
Yeah.
But I think that does create a situation where there's kind of a fun incentive or sort of fun reason for not just always to just say, well, let the person who's the absolute best at this do this. Vitality is a measure of energy, capacity to withstand energy or injury, defensibility, guard, pain threshold, etc. You have a current vitality and a max vitality. It's chosen by your template, which is 4 to 7. Most characters will have a max vitality of 5. You lose whenever whenever you're hit or suffer damage. When you run out of vitality, you're out cold. You regain vitality by taking a breather or when the fight is over. Your current vitality can never be higher than your max vitality, one would hope. Your max vitality can be temporarily lowered, however, if you are exhausted, poisoned, etc. Okay, interesting. Max vitality is restored when the condition that lowered it dropped. Since current vitality will change often, we recommend using tokens like beads or counters. You know me, I love one of my favorite gaming props of all time is freaking glass beads. I love them. Yeah, I love them. That's like my
every GM should have a cup of them.
Absolutely,
and many different colors available.
Oh yes, one of my favorite things, Ben, is we used Go Stones. For our L5R game. So, we would use them for Strife and for Fatigue. And that was awesome. I'd even hand them out, with the little,
we have the proper pinch going on.
With the proper pinch, yeah. And make the ticket on the.
When you slap it down. Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. I like that idea of using the ghost stone and you do the slap.
Yeah, the slap. Yeah, exactly. So that was
great.
But I'm an ephemera guy. I like the tactile nature of the game. Anyways, so I like that they're saying that. Abilities. Yet another reason also why I really like games that have relatively low hit point scores. I love being able to use beads and stuff like that to track them. Abilities. Now, this is what I thought were stats, but actually read kind of like aspects or traits. These are special rules that enable you to do some things that most people can't. Some of them are for combat, some are from other situations. Usually, it will cost a number of story points, to activate the ability. They have a tier. Tier 0 have no prerequisite. Tier 1 requires that you have a minimum skill level, etc. Each template has 5 abilities to pick from, and usually you start with 2. Complications. Like abilities, complications are special rules, but instead of enabling you to do things, they limit you in fun and interesting way. When it is triggered, it may give you 1 or more story points. Okay, so it's kind of like basically both sides of an aspect, but you have your stuff that you're really good at, but you need to empower it with a story point, aka a fate point, or it's a complication, and it's something that, you're basically kind of giving the GM permission to mess with you in this way, and it's expected as part of the story beats.
Yes, this is story game 101.
Yeah.
This coming out, story game 101. You see this in 7C. It's perfectly done in 7C, where you have a virtue and a hubris.
Right.
The virtue, you spend a hero point to activate your virtue, and it does some amazing thing. You or the GM can activate your hubris, though, and you get a hero point when that's activated. So we see that really nice, neat, it's very clean gameplay loop, but it is reinforcing the shenanigans.
Yeah. There's a very, I don't know if it's actually standard anymore, but I know that in the early days of Fate, and I was never a fan of this actually, which was that if the GM compelled you, if you didn't want that compel to happen, you actually had to give them a fate point to sort of
I think that's in Fate Core.
Okay, yeah, I don't like that. I'm not a big fan of that rule. Like, I'm a, if the player doesn't want the story, like, I mean, at a certain point, if they're not accepting story points for complications, what are we even doing here? But especially if it's like, well, then you don't get to do your cool moments and have your fun, time in the sun. But anyways, story points are currency. You could spend to influence the events of the story and buy yourself advantages. So story points sound like they're going to have two potential impacts, because we know we can use them to activate our abilities, but it also looks like we can potentially use them to influence the events of the story. We'll get into that. You start each session with 4. Okay. You gain them by activating your complication, getting captured, rolling a karma result on a task check. Doubles?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Just from the example of play from up above.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So 10% chance. Well, it depends on your
wait
skill.
till you see. This game really has it nailed to a very fine... It's honed in this game.
Or changing a successful task check into a failure. Awesome. That's great. I'll take the downgrade to take the story point. That's awesome. There's again, very Burning Wheel, very Torchbearer-esque, where, if you tie with an opponent, for example, you can break the tie in their favor to earn a check in Torchbearer. There's a cap on a story points, and you can't have more than 12. Okay. Very cool. Damage measured in D6s, usually between 3 to 5, 4 to 6, 7 for firearms. In a fist fight, it's 2d6. Each 4 or 6 that you roll inflicts 1 point of vitality damage. So each d6 is worth, basically, on average, half a point of damage. And remember, we know that the average max is 5. Damage rolls are open-ended, meaning that whenever you roll 6s, you roll 1 additional d6 for each 6 you roll. Repeat until there are no more rolls of 6s. So very, very swingy.
Yeah, and you're rolling a d6, which means your odds of getting a 6 is 1 in 6. So you're going to be seeing, dice explosions with this, for sure.
Most people do not wear protective gear. It's generally only worn in special circumstances. Bodyguards, public figures might wear bulletproof vests. Soldiers might wear helmets. But other than that, protective gear is very unusual. It has a protection value, equal number of d6s. And you can roll this, and this is called a soak. These are not open-ended, so they do not explode. But same thing, any 4, 5, or 6 will cancel out a point of vitality damage. All right. Well, Lollipop Candy just tipped $5. Apparently that's working. Sorry there, alternate GM.
Lollipop Candy tipped $5, just showing some support for awesome guests like Ben and for lesser-known game systems. Catch you all on the VOD.
All right, Lollipop Candy will check us on the VOD, but is showing their support for lesser-known game systems, and love that we are supporting that kind of things, and is happy to have Ben here. So thank you, Lollipop Candy. By the way, Aldrin GM, even though it didn't pop up on the screen, it did go through. So thank you for the super chat, anyways. But thank you, Lollipop. And I hope you really enjoyed the VOD. All right, so protection gear does have its disadvantages. It limits your initiative roll. Oh, no, there's initiative? But it
does have individual initiative as well.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
oh, no.
I mean, it gets, like I told you, it gets pretty gamey and pretty crunchy.
Right. It also takes time to put on from an action to a simple proof vest to half an hour for a knight's armor, and it might limit you. All right. Tags are special abilities that apply to weapons and armor. Languages. You're either proficient or you're not, or you're fluent or you're not. Most characters know 2 or 3 languages, French and English, plus the native tongue of your character's home country, if not an Anglophone or Francophone. It is actually very likely that your character isn't a native English speaker. After all, the game is set in Europe.
Yeah, and it really reinforces that, where I think in my Troubleshooters game, French is the primary language, and one of the characters has 2 or 3 other languages, and he took Spanish and Italian, I think. And I went, okay, so that's telling me, where are we going to go?
Right.
Where are we going here? Italian, great. So we can have some shenanigans in the Italian Alps. If you took, Swiss, we'd have the Swiss Alps. If you took German, it would be in the Bavarian mountains.
That's a fun way, like as a group of players, to be like, it'd be fun I want to see, I want to see some adventures in Spain. So somebody takes Spanish. It's almost like a way of kind of collaboratively world building, but doing it through the diegetic process of what languages does the group speak,
Absolutely. I any game I run, I look at the choices the player made as my opportunity. They're telling me things they want to see.
Yep.
Things they want to experience. And it's like, as GM, it's my job to read that character sheet and make everything they put on there useful, which is the main reason for D&D, especially when I have +4 languages. I go, do not pick the languages, leave them blank. And then in game, if you decide you want to know a language when it comes up, just say you know it.
So funny side story. I've told this story before, maybe I think, but in Mutants and Masterminds, a superhero RPG, you make a character. You have like 150 or 170 points to spend on your different abilities. Well, you can also buy these minor abilities. They're 1 point, right, out of 160, right, or 175, but they can be very broad in scope because it's a superhero game, so they don't want to make it cost a lot. So, for example, being fluent in like every language is 1 point. Because it's not about that. If you want that, if you want to spend, it's more for flavor, but it does cost you 1 point out of it. And there's another one which makes your character like fearless, right? And it's 1 point. And I remember we were playing through a Mutant Mastermind campaign, and Matt Holloway from our show, he had this character and he was basically saying like, this is stupid. My character is fearless and can speak every language. And I'm like, you spent 2 points on that. It's not like this is like the defining aspect of your character. He's like, basically like, but you should make that part of the game. And so the joke was that the next session, like everybody they thought was a really scary foreigner. And like, so like the whole session was coming up and it was just like,
what does he want? Good thing I can translate.
Good thing I can translate. Everyone else is like, oh my God, they're so scary. And Matt's like, I'm not afraid at all. And it became a running gag that like, even if it didn't make any sense, they were really scary and they were foreign,
That's really good. There's also a knack you can take in 7th C, which is like polyglot, I think it's called, and basically says every language, living and dead. Bang, done.
Right. Just cover the whole base.
Yeah, but if you chose that, that's telling me as a GM, okay, well, we're going to have some like Dan Brown-esque ancient scroll deciphering going on because that's what you picked. That's what you want to see.
Right. So we got a section here on session 0. Again, talking to the team about their themes, expectations, characters, roles, and locations. They create their characters, and then they create a team. So awesome. This is not one of those games where you have to conspire against other characters. Again, also probably teaching people used to, competitive board games, like where you're, playing Monopoly and you're trying to beat the other people. Your friends, blah, 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 you work together. Theme. This may be the director's decision or it could be done collaboratively with the group. So here we have some sort of broad templates. Are you curious adventurers, a la sort of kind of Indiana Jones-esque,
I think when I see the Curious Adventures, I think Johnny Quest for sure.
Okay, yeah.
I think Hardy Boys. I think Nancy Drew, like Scooby-Doo even. That to me, like that's the vibe that I got from this one.
For sure. Sleuths in the form of, Sherlock in the tradition of Sherlock Holmes. We've got agents, more of your sort of Bond-esque, formalized government secret agents. Heists, there it is. They're actually cooks with the goal, of course, of stealing from the rich to give, mostly to themselves. You gotta love it. And I like to have an example here as a touch point of Carmen Sandiego, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I really like that too because that also is a globe-trotting mystery-solving adventure thing. So I was like, I like that they didn't limit it just to like source material from the 60s, for example.
She has been around the world from Berlin to the Carolinas.
Yes, according to the song.
According to the song. They never Arkansas her steal the Great Wall of China. Any case, so we have roles within the team. So these are examples of like, again, classic A-team, the muscle, the fixer, the investigator, the doer, the specialist,
the face.
Right. Very, very, very awesome. And again, just talking to people about how do you actually put together a fun team that's going to work together, which again is something that I don't think a lot of trad 20 games do this because even though they should, because like they don't want to step on anybody's right to make whatever kind of character that they want to have, which in the class-based game is probably a problem. But any case, so we have locations. They have our flat in Paris. That'll be our base of operations. They've got that sort of cool headquarters inevitably in some sort of awesome place, Our secret base underneath the base of the Eiffel Tower, right? Like that kind of,
And I think it even says in the rules, it's like, don't have the bad guys bust their HQ. That's not what this is about. This is their safe place that they can go to plan and relax and have downtime scenes. Like, unless the story's really telling it, you don't want to have like that sanctity be interrupted by the villains, which I liked. It's not a bad. You know that's a place you can go where, yeah, they might be tapping your phones and following you and stuff like that, but you'll always be able to elude them, or there won't be a way they will be able to actually break into your place.
So in particular, again, just because this has been very top of mind for me because I'm preparing to run 2 campaigns of Torchbearer. One of the things that they talk about in Torchbearer, you go into the dungeon, you're getting tore up and grounded up, and then there's the town phase, and it says this is not the it's almost more very because Torchbearer came after Mouseguard, right? It's very much like the player's turn. This is not where you want to make adventure. The players did it. Your opportunity to mess with them is in the dungeon. When they're in town, let them recover. Let them do their stuff. Like, this is not the time to be, throwing all sorts of curves balls at their track. They should feel like this is a form of respite. And it's, you really want to think twice before you go and mess with that. Okay. Creating a character is 10 steps. All right. Pick a template, set skills, pick 2 abilities and a complication, determine your max vitality, pick your languages, select 5 gear kits, choose your plot hooks, optional, customize, design your character, and decide how you met. All right. At least the steps, it's kind of awkwardly worded, but the steps, choose your plot hooks and decide how you met, have to be done together with the other players. It is also very useful to pick templates as a group, as well as setting skills and customizing skills, making sure that you cover all each other's bases. It's more fun to make characters together, and I agree. All right. Step 1, pick a template. On page 40, this is a nice little document here. It's all hyperlinked together. There's a number of templates to choose from. Pick one. Each template has a bullet list of instructions that you follow as you create a character. So let's go ahead and take a look here.
So I will say that this part of the process, and there's no RPG that can get around it, but there's a lot of page flipping.
Sure.
Here, going back, it's not as bad as L5R, but there's a lot of page flipping when you get to this part of the session 0. Remembering where everything is and going back and forth. There's a lot of flipping that goes on here.
Right. And so it looks like, if we just, let's pick this for one, the adventurous scholar, aka our Indiana Jones kind of type character. You're a scholar, but your true place is in the field. So skills. So we set the following skills. So we get humanity 75, context 65, et cetera, et cetera. Set all other skills to 15. Then we pick 2 of the following abilities: good reputation, licensed professional, polyglot, swordsman, teacher. Choose 1 of the following complications: honest, memorable, phobia. Starting max vitality is 5. We pick 2 extra languages. We have a forensics kit, a compact car, and an archaeologist kit. Select one of them as your signature gadget. Pick up to 2 more as your choice. And then the suggested plot hooks. Pick 1 or preferably 2 from the plot hooks. For instance, 1 or 2 of these. And then in this case, you can pick from anything. But, one of the suggestions for this particular theme are foreign, arch enemy, the Octopus, friends in high places, looking for the past. And then, a little bit of a paragraph about, who you are and what you are. So these are kind of like your classes, I guess, would be the...
Yeah, they're like playbooks.
Yeah, playbooks or something like that. And by the way, there is a section here on... making a template. So
you can customize them as well. So if you have an idea for a theme, I saw someone earlier had mentioned about doing like an Italian job kind of a thing. You could totally do it. And in that case, I would probably look at making a couple of custom templates. Or if you want to do like a leverage, anything that's more heist oriented, you might want to look at making a couple of custom templates. You're not too difficult.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. So it's more of those are more suggestions that you're very flexible. You can kind of easily build them and, put them together. Okay. So, here we go. So we pick a template, then we choose 2 abilities. So we saw that there's a list of 5, but again, you're gonna have to flip to page 62 and, what do these abilities do and whatever like that. So we saw that one of the abilities that we saw for the adventurous scholar that they could pick from is licensed professional or swordsman, right? So if we go ahead and shoot over to the ability descriptors and we look at swordsman, there's more of these than I thought there would be.
There are a lot of abilities. And there are also like 68 judo throws described in detail.
Swordsman requires melee 45%. It costs 5, so I don't know what that means, but we'll get to that. There are those that keep the old martial ways alive, even in the modern world. The sword has its place in society, usually not as a weapon on the battlefield, but more for ceremony. Story point: spend 1 story point to flip an attack check if you are fighting with a sword or a sword-like object. And again, flipping basically means you turn the percentage dice around.
Yeah. And when I think, I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
And spend 1 story point to not do any damage after a successful attack check, but instead disarm your opponent, because that's obviously what people do with swords.
Yep. So the sword-like object, when I read that, I thought of there's another 60s action TV show called The Avengers that it doesn't really fit the mold of this game because it's very England centric. However, the one character, Jonathan Steed, always has an umbrella, like all the time.
It's the umbrella. I was gonna say it's the one with the umbrella. Yeah.
And guaranteed or a cane or something. He manages to use it every fight scene. It becomes a major prop, and I would totally let the player use that.
Yeah. I mean, well, they know their source material because it says it's a sword or sword-like object, so they know they know where they're at for that perspective, which is great. Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, obviously, like, here's the thing. It looks like they all follow mostly the same template, right? Which is, you get this ability to use your story points to do a couple of, fun things or mechanical things, or in some cases, give you an increased chance by flipping the dice or by just being able to do the thing, right? For example, they have their pet. Spend 2 story points to fetch you a vital thing, like the keys to the cell door or a clue, right? So it's like if you have the parrot, you spend the 2 story points, and you call to your parrot, it flies into the jail cell, flies over to the the nearby wall, a key ring, and pulls your keys off. Cool. All right. So that was step 2. Or step 3. Step 3.5, pick a complication. Try to pick one that will lead to interesting situations, not one that you think will never happen to your character. Right, exactly. And again, also too is just sort of a thing. Complications are a great way of you telling the GM, this is where I want to be messed with. Determine max vitality, which is just dependent on your template. If you customize your character and change those skills, your max vitality may also change. Pick languages. Start with French and English, but it'll tell you if you can pick 1 or 2 additional languages. Step 6, choose your gear kits. You get 3 from your template, and then you can make one of them into your signature gadget, which is described later on page 113. But then we also get 2 more gear kits. So, basically your template, your class, if you will, gives you 3, and you can pick 2 more.
And what they call gear kits could be anything from, depending on what your background is and things like that, can be anything from a shortwave radio to a sports car to a luxury yacht to ski equipment. I mean, it covers a wide range of things.
We're not worried about the GP value here as much.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is pretty cool,
I think one of them it's just called a wad of cash.
Right. And
that's the gear kit.
And I'm not trying to say that they necessarily do this, but I love the idea of, it's like, what's your special ability? It's like, well, I'm rich.
Totally.
I have
diplomat. There's a dilettante, I think, is one of the templates in here. And that is the dilettante. What are they known for? Being able to mix a mean martini, and they got lots of cash.
One of my favorite things about Final Fantasy 3, aka Final Fantasy 6, is that the way you get an airship in that game is your party member, Setzer, just has one because they're just wealthy, and they, and so Han Solo was the same way, like the Millennium Falcon was his ship, they weren't like, well, you're a level 1 scoundrel, you could never afford a Carillion YT freighter, it's like, no, that's what he has, this isn't about like earning enough cred to, start off. Anyways, so I like stuff like that, especially for this genre. And then step 7 is to each template has a list of suggested plot hooks, and you should choose 1, but preferably 2 unique plot hooks that no other character has. To make sure that your character's plot hooks are unique, you have to talk to the other characters. You may have to compromise and pick a plot hook from the master list. Although I'm not opposed to it maybe some players have like their second one maybe overlap or something like that. As long as you
The
have
way
one.
I did it, mine is one plot hook is shared
Okay, yeah,
because that's kind of like the inciting incident driving force behind everything, and then they picked individual.
yeah, that's very cool. I like this idea too. One gets picked by the director, one gets picked by you. I like that idea as well, which is great. And the idea here, you know, try not to steal the limelight, but support the plot hook characters. I like being told, hey, this isn't about you. You're here to be the secondary character, you know, to support your friends and to help them try to solve the thing. But this is their episode to shine. You know, this is their session or two to really show. And you'll get your chance too. And sometimes I think personally, it's fun to be that support character sometimes, which is, I think is really cool.
When I'm a player, I actually prefer it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a certain type. I mean, I do like, you know, leading the action and being somewhat of a protagonist. But in some ways, yeah, I prefer to watch other people drive the car, you know? Maybe it's the GM in me. Step 8, customize your character. So here you do need to get the director's permission, but you can replace one or two skills you have that are not on your list. You can swap around, basically. You can swap skills by decreasing a skill by 10 to increase another one by 10. You can do this twice if you want. If you change your weapon skills around, it could change your vitality around. So weapon skill is tied to your vitality, okay? Potentially some other languages or potentially some other complications that might not necessarily be on your list. Just because it's on your templates list doesn't mean you can't do it.
This is also a very simple way to take a limited pool of options and give them some nuance and variance so it doesn't feel samey and can guarantee like what's to make my dilettante different from your dilettante. While these little choices that we make is what's going to make them different.
Yep. And then lastly, design your character. You know, this is who is your character? We have the stats, but you know, who are they? And if they need inspiration, pick 2 or 3 items from an oracle table. So we've got D percentage, so we can roll about their look. You know,
these tables are classic that are in here. Some of the choices are really funny.
Right, walrus mustache, love it. Thigh high socks, tie dyed shirt, pinstripe jacket. Full beard, knitted dress, love it. And then that's a lot of fun there in terms of just like, you know, what's your look, what's your raiment. All right. Step 10, decide how you met. Select a player. That player rolls on the table to determine a location where the player character met someone. The player selects one other character, spins a tale about how they met based on earlier discussions. Then that other player rolls on the table, determines a new location, and then they bring in a third character in the same way and tells how the first 2 characters met the third. The third then rolls and selects a fourth and tells how they all met the fourth, and repeat in this way. The last player will not get to roll on the table. Sorry. That's pretty fun, you know, especially if you're like, I don't want to make up a tale.
You always have one person in the group who's like, yeah, you guys can go.
You guys can go.
Nice to be like, you don't have to. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So I love it, you know, and so this is kind of like the Avatar How We Met.
The inciting incident for Avatar, which I think is brilliant. And I've actually used it in other games. Yeah. It's such a great idea where it tells a story. First we did this, our goal was that, then we did that, and this is how we overcome it, or we're still struggling with the outcome of that.
Right.
Done.
Yeah, I love the idea of making session 1, session 0. You know, in this case, it's almost like you're making sessions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, depending on the size of your party. Yeah. Because you've already been through. You know, you don't have this awkward like, well, we're all in a tavern and no, like we've skipped past that. We've been to Amsterdam. Then we were in Beijing, and remember when I saved your life, and and that's where we have a Chinese character with us. You know, she got involved and she saved our life, and you saved my life in Beijing, and then she came with us to Jerusalem. You know, and there was an attempt to try to, I don't know, steal the Holy Grail or something, you know what I mean? Like, and you get these really cool stories that have developed before you even get to the game.
And you get all the in-jokes kind of going as well right off the bat, which is nice.
You know, it kind of reminds me of a more modern thing in the Avengers films, not the Avenger with Emma Peel, but the Avengers movies. You know, there's that kind of running joke between the 2 characters, Hawkeye and Black Widow, where they're like, this reminds me of Budapest, you know, you and I remember Budapest very differently, you know, and then like, we've come a long way since Budapest. And it's like, that's cool because, you know, they don't really ever tell you what it was.
Yes.
Right.
And I like how Broken Compass / Outgunned does this really well, where you can create fiction merely by referencing it from the past. And you do that. You're meant to do it in situ, in game, but I love when games allow you to do that, where the GM just has to roll with it.
Right.
Just rolls with it. Like we had an instance in our a Broken Compass campaign. This was in an Arctic. There was an alien base under the Arctic, essentially, but the bad guys were coming in dirigibles, and so they were on Iditarods. So how are Iditarods with wolves or dogs or whatever supposed to outrun these ships, these warships that are coming in, airships? And the one character turns to the other character and he goes, do you still have that dynamite that we had packed for the expedition? And the other character goes, yeah, sure. They're like, great. So they basically figured out a way to launch sticks of dynamite at the airships. Of course, they blow up in spectacular fashion because that's what the game is all about.
Right.
I had nothing to do with it. I just sat back and watched the chaos. It was great.
The player characters escaping across a bleak Arctic wilderness on mushing sled dogs while being pursued by dirigibles is like the most like pulp action thing I can possibly imagine, and I love it. That's fun stuff. That's fun fiction. I love that stuff. But, okay, so we've got the long list of templates. We're not going to go through all these, but we saw these. These are basically your classes, but you can make up your own if you want. And then the plot hooks, remember, this is the idea that you can share some of them, but, you can also pick them up. Now, it does say there may seem like there are too few, but the low number is intentional to make sure that there is guaranteed overlap between the plot hooks of the characters and the starting handouts in the adventure book. But, you could always make up your own, and that can really set the tone for your game as well. But, the plot hooks are the way that you can kind of spotlight your character. You're in exile. You have friends in high places. This is the episode where you find out that your one friend is actually the heir to a throne, and he has to go back to his home.
Oh, yeah. And that actually, during, the little play example, something like that comes up in here as well.
Perfect. And then the adventure books have at least 4 starting. So is there a lot of product that's been made for this game?
No, I have the only book that's currently available, which is this adventure, which is called The U-Boat Mystery, and they just released Kickstarters another 2 adventures.
Got it. Okay.
That are the same thing. These are they're not really chunky at all. There we go.
But they are
quite
hardback.
Thin.
But they are hardback.
Oh man, and they're just actually. Let me switch this real quick. I mean, these are just as gorgeous as everything else. Okay, look at this. All right, the layout. I mean, this is a pretty swish product, all things considered.
Yeah,
looks fantastic. All the maps are in there. Blah 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 blah. Same thing. Starting hooks, clues, blah. Et cetera, et cetera.
No, yeah, that's awesome. That looks amazing. Yeah, awesome. And again, same kind of style, and they're putting the same amount of attention to detail that they did with their core.
And that's the thing too. Usually, once you get out of the core rules, the supplements do tend to not be as high quality. Right. Whereas I did not see that here.
Yeah, awesome. So here we have our skills, and again, we're not going to go through all these, but we have 5 types. There's background skills, social skills, investigation skills, action skills, and combat skills. And by the way, I've always said this before. Look at the skills of a game. It's kind of gives you usually a good indication of what this game is about. In this case, interacting with people, solving clues and gathering, solving mysteries, gathering clues, doing awesome, cool parkour stunts and stuff like that. And, getting into scraps and getting into fights. And that's usually a great way of sort of expressing that. How good is good? If you're 80%, you're the elite. If it's 100%, you're a legend. If you have a skill around 65, you're a competent working class professional. Through extensive and often for the subject painful science, I've discovered that skill values around 66% are the most fun. Right, it's 2/3. I've always said 2/3 is.
But that is, and we've talked about this before. I think maybe this is only on the Discord, but generally speaking, players, when you have a game and it's worked out to about 65-70%, I think he says 66 here, to a player that feels like 50-50.
Yes.
Whereas 50% feels like it's weighed against the player.
Feeding 50% feels like you're I fail every time.
Yes.
I don't even know why I'm flying. But
true coin flip is no good.
Yeah, exactly. Because the thing is it is problematic. I mean, we introduce dice because we want randomness, and so this is why quote unquote Blades in the Dark and stuff start to fail at a certain point because the successes become so deterministic. But you don't want it to be. I think 60 to 70% is definitely a sweet spot. And I've always said too that for me, even in the concept of a classic D20, they need a 10 or 11 to hit, that's like the 50-50. It's no, I like a 7, a 6, that's a good range for me personally. Okay. So here's our skill list and running, jumping, climbing, swimming trees, looking around, charming, social. And we can see all the different types broken down here. Okay, it's not super long. Looks like there's maybe 25 skills.
Yeah, there's not that many.
Now, some of them obviously it's interesting. So we can see here credit is one, right? Purchases, loans, bribes, having cash on hands. Is that how Call of Cthulhu handles money?
Yes.
Through skills?
Yeah, it's abstracted through your credit rating.
Yeah, okay. So very clearly influenced by that, BRP type thing there. Singing, playing instruments, telling stories, acting is just one skill called entertainment, which is great.
Yes.
I don't need all it's just like it's also part of the genre. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, there's the character that is really good at singing or really good at telling. Let's say you have the character that's really good at telling stories and they're really thinking, of course, when they have to fill in for the person, he comes in and he can play the piano.
Oh yeah, when you have the one where there's a murderer at the playhouse and we need someone to infiltrate this musical. That's the character just because they have the catch-all entertainment skills.
Right, catch-all.
Do it all.
Oh, no, I can't do that. I'm just really good at this one specific thing, which is, by the way, how real life works. Like just because I'm good at woodworking doesn't mean I can weld. But in RPGs and in shows and movies, like it does work that way. So good stuff here. And again, you can see that there is there is some distinction between certain things because they want, that's a background skill. They want that to be, that's a social skill. But it's like the social skills cover those broad groups. Well, the same thing with investigation. If investigation wasn't a big part of this game, then I could totally see something like red tape not being a skill. Because you could just kind of lump everything under probably one skill called investigation. You know what game does that? 5e D&D. And it's because they say, look, this is not a game about investigation. It's a game about going into dungeons and slaying monsters, despite what you might think. But here's a game that says, no, investigations is a part of this as well. So we're going to break it up into humanities, and we're going to break it up into actual investigation and red tape and science. And, knowing about art and history and linguistics and anthropology is different than knowing about physics and chemistry and biology, because there's enough game space for it to be worth the crunch of those different skill levels.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because you always have players like, oh, prestidigitation, I'm going to take that. And then by the time we're done character creation, they're like, you know what? Now that I know that we're going to be traveling a lot, you know what? I'm going to take humanities and grab those 2 extra languages.
Yeah.
They'll default to fun or what they, will serve the game a little bit better. But it's funny to watch there's a little bit of angst watching the players like, oh man, there aren't that many skills. And then when you start going through, you go, wow, this is like the choices become harder. The more you understand the game, the harder those decisions become, because now you realize, wow, this is like a deep impact on how the game's going to play. So those decisions become very important.
I like how these skills are presented. It tells you about the skill, what is explicitly used and not used for. And then there's this use it when these situations come up. And then it says, if the chest fails, here, it may seem like a minor thing, but it's like, what happens? Like it says, and this is important, you do not accomplish your task, or you accomplish it too late. So it may not be that, the Octopus agent is getting away in their mini sub, right? And you dive into the water and you try to swim and catch them. And it's like, oh, I failed my agility tech. Well, it's not that your character started drowning. It's that you couldn't catch the sub, maybe you got to the edge of it and the guy, hit the thrusters and it, blew you off and you're left, underwater.
Oh yeah. That's where you tell the scene, as you're climbing up the side of the submarine, it starts to sink.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then after it goes down, 3 feet, 4 feet,
right.
5 feet, you decide you can't hang on anymore. Right. You have to let go, and you let go.
Right. Exactly.
Slap the top of the water when you break through the waves.
Of course, that would exactly be what happened. So yeah, so that's that kind of, where I like that they're making that clear distinction there. So information about all the skills, which is cool. And then also we get into a section, I'm just going to skip ahead here to the abilities. Now remember, we talked about before, but abilities require you to spend those story points. We start with some, but we also get them by losing, by getting knocked out, and getting captured, I should say. And that's very reminiscent for me, like Mutes and Masterminds, where it'd be like, the villain laughs, ha ha ha, and the room starts filling with poison gas, and you're all knocked out, and we'll go to the next scene. Here's a hero point for everybody. Yes, I kind of just cheated, but, let's not make this a big deal. It's part of the fun of this genre. So, you know, it kind of feels good, you know, because you're like, well, we got captured and we got knocked out. D&D players hate this. Like, they hate this so much. And yet it is a core component of almost every TV show you've ever watched. From the cartoon shows of your youth to the modern day, you know, thrillers and dramas. People are getting knocked out and captured all the
What
time.
I find one of the great ironies of D20 is that these are the people that hate Mary Sues in movies and fiction and stuff, but yet their characters, they want to be total Mary Sues.
Well, the way I understand it is, this is the way that most D&D players want. This is my understanding. This is D20. This is my, again, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but they want failure to be a real thing, and they want it to not have the kid gloves on. You know, failure, it means death, and they want it to be a real chance. They just never want it to happen to them. Like, so it's like, okay, that puts, do you know how dice work? That's not quite how it is. Derek says, I'm ready to clip this and incriminate me. I mean, look, I think it's fine saying I don't want to die. I think it's fine saying, like, I'm totally fine having a reasonable chance of death, but you can't have it both ways. Okay. So ability descriptors basically kind of give us this ability to just, again, looks like sometimes we get some mechanical effects, like being able to, you know, get a bonus or something like that. Now, Ben, this is the second time I've heard this mentioned, and it probably was described in the glossary and I skipped over it. But like, if we look at the acrobat ability, which is basically like a feat, you know, an aspect, it says movement task checks are at +2 pips.
Yes.
So what is that? What does that mean?
It's brilliant, but Dave Thermivore did not. I don't think he really grokked the way the pips work when he did his review, and part of it is probably just his background, where he's coming from, and the kinds of games he probably enjoys. He did not like it. He much preferred the variant rule, where each pip adds 5%, I think.
Okay.
So you have positive pips and negative pips.
Yep.
Positive pips. In the variant rule is each pip adds 5%. So if you're at +3 pips, you'd add 15% to your skill. If it's minus, you'd be at a lower skill. But that's the variant rule.
Okay.
Now, I do have one small problem with the language of pips, and this is a legit complaint. And that's because when I say pips, what do you think of?
D6s.
Okay.
All right. I think of D6s. I think of dice pips.
Yep. But yet it pertains to the percentages, not to the D6s. And because this game has D6s and D10s, to me, as a native English speaker and longtime gamer, I find the term to be not misleading, but confusing.
Okay. So what does it actually mean?
Okay, it's brilliant, but this is where I think I love this kind of a thing. I don't know how you feel about it. I'm really curious to see what you think about it.
Okay.
So pips range basically from 1 to 3. Okay. When there is a negative pip, when you roll your percentile, if the ones place lands within that pip range or that complication range, you automatically fail. If it's positive pips, even if your percentile would fail, but it's within the pip range, you automatically succeed. So let's say you have a 60% chance of succeeding at something, but it has a 2 pip failure, and you roll a 52, you failed.
Got it. So it looks at not just the sum of the it overrides, and it looks at the ones position.
Yes.
And
so
that becomes, I got it.
Yeah. So what it does is it allows the GM to not look at how good you are at something, but to say, even though you're really good, this is so difficult to do. To skydive, base jump 50, 60 feet down and land in the water and safely come up and grab the side of the boat at the same time. It's so complicated. In reality, you only have a 60% chance of actually doing this, or a 30% of doing it, and use the pips to fine-tune it. However, the game also then has the karma system, and it has story points and all these other things you can do to flip that roll, which is what I said. The player can get a thing, you apply pips, it becomes a failure automatically. And then you can flip it, or the player can then flip it and make it a success. And that's all done through the storytelling.
So let me say, so it's like I said, if my agility, let's say, was 65%, and I roll a 13, but the GM said this was a -1 pip skill check. Even though I rolled 13, which is less than 65, I passed. But because I rolled,
it would be a 31.
I'm sorry, 31. But because I rolled a 31, basically it's a way to say, if you say -1, you're basically saying just if you succeed, there's a 10% chance that you didn't.
Yes.
But if I flipped it from a 31 to a 13,
I'm still
passing, but now my ones digit is a 3, which is outside of that negative pip range.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's kind of cringier than I thought it would be.
It's really cool because when you couple that with good and bad karma, which we'll get into, and complications, conditions, which we'll get into, now you have a simple percentile roll becomes way more than just pass fail now. Yeah. Now there's so many nuances and there's so many floating currencies that we can employ to fine tune what the result of that roll will be. It gets very, very nuanced. I think it's really, really cool. When I read about the pips, I first went, what, huh? And I read it a couple of times.
That's terrible. That is not a great name. I don't.
Yeah, and I don't know why it was named that way. Anything else would have been better.
Especially because pips is fine, but D10s are like definitely don't have pips.
Exactly. I've never seen a D10 with 10 pips on one side.
Yeah, that's pretty rough. Okay, so let's talk about these complications then. So again, remember, you're going to pick one or two for your character. After the general description of your complication, there's a header that lists possible ways of using it to gain story points. These should be initiated by the player, not the director. Complications are the player's way. So the player is responsible for this. So one of the ways you can do it is you can get 3 points. Okay, so that's a lot. For making a task check in a scene more difficult, or for purposely failing a task that you just succeeded at, or by taking a condition. And again, I'm just speculating here, but you're basically like, this pisses my character off, and I'm going to take this condition of angry, and it's going to have this mechanical consequence, but I'm going to get 3 story points for that. Additionally, 6 points if you write yourself out of a scene altogether.
This is the one I wanted to ask you how you feel about this.
Okay.
In particular.
Okay.
And the example they give on the sidebar is that he's so drunk he missed the fight or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see here. I think those two are stalking us. Who? Oh, those two. Shit. Now that you've done, I think that's French for shit. Now you've done it. They're running off. Come on, people. We gotta stop them. What? Well, I had a glass too many on the flight, and a couple more in the hotel bar. This is the professor guy who had the drunkard thing. So I'm bloody wasted at this time. I get 3 story points if I take the intoxicated condition. It could have been worse. I could have just chosen to collapse the bar and not been in this scene at all. That'd be worth 6 story points. So that's interesting. I mean, it's player driven. It's your choice. Jackal says you get paid not to play. Yeah, it's like I've got a guaranteed contract, whether I play or not. I think there's a couple of things, which is one is realistically, I get it. Like in this game, it's an RPG, right? I struggle with this myself sometimes. Superhero games and stuff. When you watch a show, even a ensemble cast show, there are not really that many scenes that have every single character in them. And we kind of bend over backwards in RPGs to do that, to accommodate that, because we want everybody to be active and everybody to be involved, and that's totally acceptable. But from a genre perspective, I don't think it's necessarily accurate. I don't know that 6 in a vacuum, the max you can have is 12. You start with 4. 6 feels like a lot. So, if a character uses their complication as a reason for them not to have been in this scene because it'll put extra emphasis or extra whatever onto another character or 2 or 3, or maybe you just, it's not, you don't feel like there's not a lot that you're going to be able to contribute here anyways, you might as well tap out. Sure, you don't get to quote unquote play, but as long as the scenes are fairly snappy, you're not, I'm going to be sitting here doing nothing for 90 minutes. I think I'm okay with that.
I really like the idea of rewarding the fact that sometimes a player just can't think of how they're going to contribute to a scene,
Yeah.
or it doesn't make sense that they're there. Now, 2D20 does a phenomenal job in overcoming this by going, well, you're playing more than one character.
Right.
So your main character isn't there. You have these reserve characters that come in. Other games that use troop play fix it the same way by going, well, there's no reason why my sous chef would be breaking into the second story of this house. But, we have a thief character. Yeah, we'll take him out of the reserve pool and we'll use the thief instead, the second story man. It just makes more sense. Or the cat burglar. The fact that this game goes, you can write yourself out, but you get an extremely big reward for it. But man, you are screwing over everyone else during that scene, because if you're playing a game where these people are hyper competent, but now you're invoking this complication by writing yourself out of the scene, you bear all the reward for it, but yet, they don't benefit from your skill set in that scene. And I just love that dynamic. The idea of that playful, friendly competition that's taking place, I think is really, really good. However, what it doesn't say in here is there's no limit to it. And the GM might go, well, you can do it once per session.
Yeah, I would find it very strange if a player wanted to be out of more than one scene, in a
Yeah.
limited session, but I could totally see that being a reasonable
Yeah,
thing.
I'm surprised that it doesn't address that here, but common sense would say, and I think there is a thing where later on where it's like, look, man, if you're playing against the group as a player, you should think about leaving the group, I think it says.
I love the painful simplicity of unlucky. Fortune does not favor some people. You are one of them. The director can flip any task check you make. Each time they do this, you gain 3 story points.
This came up. Okay, so this came up during our session 0, and we had a lot of talk about, and one player kept taking it and then taking it and putting it back, taking it and putting it back, taking it. He's like, I love the idea of it.
Right.
Because that is like maximum shenanigans. But he goes, I've played with you enough to know you will use it all the time.
Right.
You will just use it all. I said, well, I can only use it 4 times in one session.
Right.
If you're not spending the story points at the max, I can do it 4 times. It's like, but I know you, and you will just run with it. And I'm like, yeah, that is a very true. That's true point. I will.
Yes.
But I love the idea of it, and he liked the idea of it, but he's like, I just know you will just
Right. He doesn't
play
like
to the hilts.
he doesn't like who he's giving his ammunition to.
That's basically what it was.
Right.
But it went back and forth a couple of times. But that's a beautiful example of, really embracing that idea of the flipping.
Okay. All right. So we've got actions and fights to get through. And we've talked a lot about story points, and there's a section on them, but we can probably skip through that because we really, I think, have a good beat on them. But we'll go through that. So let's talk about actions. I think we have a fair understanding of this, but let's get into this. So basically, it sounds like whenever you want to do something, describe what you want to do, and if it's reasonably likely but not guaranteed, then find a skill value, roll the percentage, and compare it. It's shut up or roll the say yes or roll the dice, basically. So the director sets the scene, the player, and describes. The players describe how their characters react and act. The situation then develops. Sometimes the outcome of action is not that clear. So very, very common. Resolution here. Use the dice when success or failure is not assured. You're trying something daring or challenging or dangerous. Whenever you find it interesting. I don't like that line of advice. Me being a very pedantic person, whenever you find it interesting. Okay. Do not use the dice when the outcome is not relevant, if there's no risk, if the character really can't affect the situation, etc., etc. So we talk about scenes here. There are 3 main types of scenes. The transitional scenes is when you're moving on. Travel is often involved, and if there are any actions in the scene, sum them up, make the dice roll go, and book. It's almost like a montage type scene, right? We see the character buying the tickets for first class, and then we're, there's not really role playing or anything.
Yeah,
So.
I call that travel by map.
Yeah.
Where you cut to the overlay of the map with the red line.
With the red line, dotted line, yes. A special type of transitional scene is the planning scene. They pore over clues, decide what to do next. The director is rarely involved in a planning scene, except if the players ask if they can get stuff they need. Once all the players have a consensus, we move on to the travel to that location. Detailed scenes are where we need a better overview of the location and tighter interaction. This is when they're infiltrating the base, looking for evidence, mingling in a Monte Carlo casino. Detailed scenes are not summed up. Instead, this is more of a beat by beat, line by line type action. And then the last one is the action scene. This is probably when we zoom in the most. They're very detailed. Not only do you resolve actions, but you also need to determine an order and immediate consequences, aka probably initiative. So that's kind of our 3 scenes, right? Which is not all that distant from conflict, narrative, and downtime scenes from Legend of the Five Rings, which uses the same exact type of things. Anon says, do players get story points if they don't show up for the game at all? They would, Anon. However, you lose them all and start at 4, I think, at the start of the next session. Is that right, Ben? So
yeah, you would say it would reset.
It would reset. It wouldn't do you any good. So there you go. Your master plan of I will beat the campaign by never playing it. So it talks about scene framing. Who's there? What are you doing? Describe all this type of stuff. Who, what, where, when, how. Classic scenes framing, which I love. And also, again, it's a comic book. I'm okay. I like frame. I like framing scenes. I like hard cuts. Hard framing, soft framing. I like starting off. In action. Rather than sort of like letting the players meander forever and take forever to get there. It's like pacing is a thing. So our base task check, roll percentage, compare it to your skill. If it's equal or under, you succeed. If it's over, you fail. Modifiers affect the circumstances beyond your personal aptitude. Equipment can make a task easier. Bad weather can make it harder, etc., etc. They are both greater chance and lower chance are measured in pips, which is a terrible name. We've discussed this. If the check has a modifier, you first compare the ones digit of the D percentage roll to that modifier. This takes precedence over the normal comparison of the skill value. If it's a positive value, check the ones digit, and if the D percentage roll of the ones digit is between 1 and X, where X is the number of pips you have, it succeeds regardless of whatever you roll. So, for example, obviously you'll still make the regular check, but if you said pip plus 5, you're basically saying anybody has a baseline 50% chance of succeeding at this task.
Yes.
Outside of any sort of skill that you personally have. If the ones digit is not between 1 and X, check if the outcome is lower, equal to, or lower than the skill value as usual. So you do that check first, and then you sort of compare it against your skill. So it's basically a way of using 1 die roll to make 2 checks, which is one is like, was your skill good enough, or was the situation hard enough or easy enough that you were going to fail or pass regardless, is how I would look at that, right?
And I think this ties back into where it said you view bigger numbers, bigger rolls as being more dramatic. This is a perfect case in point, because if you're working with positive pips, you have a high chance of succeeding just based off of the 1 die anyway.
Yeah.
Then if you exceeded, it would have normally have failed, but because you have the positive pips and you succeed, that's like against all odds you've just succeeded. That's how that would be framed. Because if you have a 65% chance of succeeding, let's say, and it's let's say 62, and you have plus 3 pips, and you rolled a 71, you succeeded against all odds now. Now it's almost like there's a luck factor that comes into play, because you should have failed,
right,
but yet you succeeded.
Right. Well, it's also a way of sort of externalizing, right? The skill represents you, and then the pips represent, your equipment, the difficulty, adverse or beneficial circumstances, etc. So
yes, and the gear kits do add bonuses and pips as well.
Yeah, and we can see here that it's a way for the GM to assess difficulty, kind of by avoiding math though, right? Like, because you're not like making them take 20% off.
Yeah, you're just eyeballing it.
Yeah.
You're going, it feels like a -2. I mean, like, how difficult will that actually be? Who knows? You're not going to know until you're actually playing the game a lot, and you see -2 is actually really hard to overcome.
Right. Another way to look at it, kind of, is like mischance from D20. You know how you have your attack roll, but then there's also this separate die roll that you make, like the flat DC4 check in Pathfinder 2nd edition, right? DC5 or whatever for light concealment, or flat check DC10 or whatever it is, 11 for heavy concealment. It's the same basic idea, right? So you're basically making, but you're just doing it with 1 die roll instead of 2 separate die rolls. So it's very similar to that. So instead of modifying the DC, because there's really no DC in this, you're basically kind of, giving this example of that.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Anon has a point where you might want to bring up his
so the
text.
PIP says the PIP system completely undermines the clarity of the percentiles, though.
Right.
And I've heard a lot of people, like Vin has said many times, that one of the things they love about D100 is the clarity of just going, hey, I know I have a 70% chance of succeeding.
And if that bothers you, you could
use the variant
just use the variant rule where you're not counting the pips that way. You're not using this very granular setting. Instead, you're just adding 5% or subtracting 5% per pip.
Right.
And that's it.
Which is a little bit more math, but totally reasonable. Okay. So it's hard for me to and by the way, here's that optional rule, the task value. Instead of -1 pip or +1 pip, it just becomes -%, 5% or +5%. I don't know how I feel about that. Like it's I don't have enough experience with D100 systems to really know how that's going to affect it. I definitely think it'll create like those kind of like heartbreaker moments where like somebody crushes it, but then they roll that one. But you do have these options, potentially to flip it and change stuff around.
Yes, and I think once again you have to look at what the genre this game is emulating, where capture and getting conditions and things like that is part of the game. The idea of this game is you start off strong, and then as complications pile up, you like tie a can around your ankle, and then you have 2 cans and 3 cans and 4 cans and 5 cans. So finally you're captured, or it reaches that dramatic breaking point. The pips just tie into that really well by making it so that it's not a guaranteed thing. Even if it's your best skill, if it's really difficult to do, it's not as easy to do. And I think that by taking it and chunking it into 5% blocks, plus and minus, to me is, you're getting very D20 in that mentality where you're just doing anything to 5% chunks.
Well, 5%
whereas what
chunks
I like
is a +1, -1.
Yes, I love that really fine detail that you can get with a percentile, which the pips exploits that, but makes it, that you feel the full swinginess of a D100 when you're rolling that, going, wow, I'm rolling this thing, but with 3 pips. If I roll, a 3 or less on the ones die, I have failed. And I think part of it is the mentality people have of going, well, not realizing that it's just one face of the D10.
Right.
It's like rolling a D10. You're just rolling 2 of them instead of 1, but you're only counting 1 of them.
So I'll say this again. I'm not a D100 expert, but one of my concerns for D100 is similar to my concern for Dragonbane, which is a D100 system. It's D20 roll under, but instead of using 100, right, they just divided by 5. So you have a D20, but your skill is in Dragonbane, your skill is 17. And then if you roll a 17 or less on a D20, you succeed. Part of the problem I have with those skill systems, and I know that this is going to sound like anathema to the simulationist purists out there, is when a character becomes very good at a skill, even if it's tough or difficult, they're still probably going to succeed. And it becomes very difficult to challenge those type of players. And you still want them to be hyper proficient, but you also want to make it so that them failing is a real possibility. And if you just do something like, oh, you have an 85% drive, you're like, well, I'm going to give you a -15. You're like, okay, I still have a 70% chance of succeeding at this. I'm almost certainly going to pass. And most of the time I will, especially if I have the ability to flip. But when you say, okay, you have an 85% drive, but this is -3 pips, you're going to have, you will default fail on a 1, 2, or 3. Suddenly you have this baseline chance of failure stacked on top of your normal chance of failure. And it actually feels a little bit more like, that I've thrown myself to the lions here, like my skill isn't what's determining it. There's a bit of that random chance, that fate. And I like that because part of the problem I have with these systems is I feel like they could become very boring when you become very good at something. Okay. So we talked about flipping checks. Some abilities let you do this, but apparently you can do this just anytime for 2 story points. So having an ability can maybe let you do it for free in certain circumstances, or for 1 story point. We saw a couple of examples of that, but I guess by default you can do it for 2. Which is cool.
Although I think that's also open to a bit of discussion where the GM might determine that is not right for the scene. I believe that is mentioned in one of the dialogue boxes, where it's a little back and forth with it. I know for me, I wouldn't care. If they want to burn their resources because they absolutely feel they must succeed in this one check in a game where you can't die, all right, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, as a role-playing game, the most important part is here. Tell the director how you flip the check. Don't just say, I flip. Okay, but what is that? What is that? Like you're taking control of the situation here. You're exerting some narrative influence, but that's going to have an influence in our fiction. That's going to have an influence in our narrative. I want to know what that looks like, and this is a cool opportunity for you to make, to describe what we know is happening mechanically. You are flipping a defeat into a success, and you're doing a judo reverse move, one of the 17 apparently that the game contains. So I do. I like moments like that where the system demands right answers from the players. That to me is the challenge of role playing, which I like. All right, so here's karma. If you roll the same number on both dice, so 11, 22, 33, you gain karma and a story point. So there's a little bit of dagger heart here. If you succeed, you gain good karma, but if the roll fails, you gain bad karma. Okay, so flat out, that means you have a 10% chance of rolling with karma. Right?
Yes, on top of the other widgets you have going on.
Right, on top of all the other widgets. Right, because there's 10 doubles. And so that means that you have a 10% chance on any roll that you're going to gain karma and a story point. Now, if the roll succeeds, it's good karma. If the roll fails, it's bad karma. Okay. Good karma means something positive happens as agreed upon by you and the director. Some situations provide specific rules for good karma. Here are two basic fallback successions. The next task check you make, so this is very much like a spin from Fate. I think it's called, or it used to be called boosts, but no, it used to be called spin. Now I think it's called boosts. Either the next check your opponent makes is -2, or the next check you make is +2. Bad karma means something bad happens. As with good karma, it provide rules for determining the outcome, but here's two simple fallbacks. The enemy reinforcements arrive. Your next task check is at -2 pips. So this is basically the equivalent of yes and also no and like we're gonna make a good situation better, we're gonna make a bad situation worse. It's not really like a partial success, because it just makes good things bad, and good things good and bad things bad.
Yeah, badder and gooder.
Yeah, badder and gooder. So it's definitely pushing it towards the extremes. I mean, 10% to me is a good number. It'll come up often enough that you're going to see it in a session. It's not going to feel completely random. Although I got to admit, like, you're going to be like, okay, all right, I rolled the dice. Okay, I rolled lower than my skill. Okay, but wait, I had pips. Okay, I passed the pips. All right, was that karma?
Oh, yeah, but I'm using this equipment. And, it's pluses and minuses, a lot of nuance before that roll is done. I think this is the kind of game where it does, it's not rules light. It's light enough. It's got a fair amount of crunch in there, but I think after 2 sessions, you'd have this mastered. You'd be very
cool. Look, it's not like it's Pathfinder 2 here, but
this ain't no Flames of Freedom.
Yeah, right.
That's for sure.
That massive book. Okay, so challenges is like their version of a skill challenge. And they, you tell them how many checks they have, and then there's this kind of cool little like how'd they do. So instead of determining like it runs for a number of rounds or until you pass it, which is I never liked. Smith used to do a version in 4E called it the 1-round skill challenge, right? Like everybody basically got to contribute once. We went around the table once, and that was one and done. So if you're going to hand out 5 task checks, then if they get all 5 of them, they get great. If they only get 4, it's good results. If they get 0, it's abysmal. If it's 1, it's bad. So there's this idea of this gradient. So it's not like binary pass fail. It's how much did you succeed, which is right. I actually like that.
Yeah, it kind of gives you like a little montage scene as well. Where everyone describes what they're doing.
And I also like the idea that, like it says, like every character should have at least 1 check, but there's a possible option that you might double up on somebody. Like maybe it's the chase scene, and your character who's the really good driver, everybody gets to do something. In fact, they have to do something, but there's an extra check, and we're going to let the driver have 2 checks in this kind of montage chase scene, because this is what they do. Not only does it make sense mechanically, but it also feels like it would be a moment in the story beat where we would pay more attention to their character. So very cool. All right. Duels. A special kind of challenge is a duel, often used for chases, games, and the action duels. You try to be the first to win a number of opposed task checks. You don't set the skills for the task in advance, but make them up as you go. Okay, interesting. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but it's like a very much a specific, basically like an opportunity to just kind of like do this kind of one-on-one kind of challenge mode. And like they say, you can see the example here of play, like they're ducking and weaving through the city streets, and it's like they do something, you do something, they do something, you do something. Who's going to get away? So the
Yeah,
key,
this is done. Doctor Who, actually, that RPG has a very similar kind of thing as well, which I kind of like. Where Call of Cthulhu has chases, obviously, but I mean, those are geared towards a certain end. Whereas I feel like this, where it's more like about the car. What I think of? Ronin, the chase scenes in Ronin, or maybe the French Connection, something like that, where it's these hairpin turns around these like small French streets and little, like just like the cover of the book is like little cafes, and you're smashing through cafe tables and chairs, and there's people, window washers coming with the ladders, and the flower girl, and all this other stuff while you're driving these cars, making these impossible turns and stuff. And it gives you a chance to zero in, and it's just like those beats, boom, 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 back and forth kind of a thing, which could be a lot. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Like, what are you doing? Well, we're walking back and forth with this glass pane across this street until the chase
Wayne's
scene
World,
occurs.
and we're here to pile up these chickens.
And we're here to pile up these crates of chickens. Yes, exactly. And then this is a great page, which is, hey, here are all these crazy situations that come up a lot in these games. How might you resolve that? So, they're trying to appraise the art value. Oh, well, that's a humanities check. What if they're asking around for clues? Well, it might be a charm, contacts, investigation, could be a red tape challenge. So I like that they give you this really nice sort of breakdown of how you might, tons of examples of where you might use the skill, which is great, which is really fun. So then last we have fights. There will be danger, challenges, fisticuffs, and shoot-offs. And by the way, speaking of you crazy French bitches, you won't get away with this. Wrong. I'm a Greek bitch. And I won't let you get away with kidnapping my friend. Let me teach you a lesson, me and my wrench. So, fighting. So in the short term, fight to attract attention. Gunshots will result in armed police showing up at the location. Even fist fights in public made people call the police. In the long term, wounds and need care. Professionals need also call. So basically, fights aren't just like take 5 minutes and you're back to full afterwards, right? There's going to be consequences to that. So when a fight starts, looks like it's a zone-based combat system, and then we determine an initiative order.
Yeah, and it gets a little crunchy. With the way zones work in the action economy, what that translates to in game, which once again, this game is about hyper competent people that don't always succeed.
Right.
So it's made to tell those kinds of stories.
So zones sound very similar to Fate zones, where it's just like this is sort of a relative abstract area, and you have to take a move.
Actually, yeah, this is closer to like 2D20, but maybe even a little bit more granular than that. It's not quite squares, but it's not quite like very abstract, like a here, there, over there kind of a thing.
Right. Well, like in like Fate, you might have a zone that was like, it's like, the front of the cafe,
yes, exactly like that.
Behind the register, the back store room. Those might be the three zones.
It's exactly like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So more like descriptive, really, than anything.
Yes.
And then to move between them, you have to make a move check, but sometimes it does not require a task if you're just walking through there. So very cool. Initiative. It's alertness. On a bad karma, your initiative is 0. Okay, so high is good. If the check fails, your initiative is the 1s digit. If the check succeeds, your initiative is the 10s plus the 1s digit. And on a good karma, which means you roll double and succeeded, you add 10 to your initiative. Interesting. Okay, so you're going to have numbers ranging from 1 to 30, or 0 to 30, I think would be the highest you could have.
Yeah, and I think this is a good example of a game because this is quite a dice-happy game. I probably will have you roll initiative at the top of the session.
Okay.
And that's your initiative for the session. It just makes it one less thing to have to deal with later.
I'm not going to go on a rant here about why I don't like initiative rolls and I don't like initiative systems, but we'll save that for another day.
Yeah, I mean, this is the game. This is part of it. It's individualized, so
so you roll initiative, you determine what you're going, you start your turn, you take actions, you end your turn. There may be things that happen. For example, some conditions drop at the start of your turn. This is not your action. Okay, on your turn, you can take a move, a free, and a main. And very 5e here. In some cases, you may get a fourth action, which is a bonus action. This happens directly after your main actions, and we can delay. Another thing that I grimace about. I've come to hate readying and delaying in round-based D20 initiatives. If you delay your main action, it may be triggered outside of your turn. When you are attacked, you may in some cases defend yourself and counterattack. Some director characters, GM characters, can make a counterattack if attacked. The counterattack happens immediately after the attack before any other actions happen. Move lets you move to an available adjacent zone, and some zones may be restricted and require a test check to move into or out of, and if it fails, the move action is forfeited. So, if there's a zone here and a zone there, but there's a security checkpoint with a fence, that's an obstacle. So if you wanted to get to the other side of it, you'd have to shoot your way through or flip over or do something that is fancy. Otherwise, you can just move back there. Free actions are your basic say something, do something, pick something up, change your weapon, fall prone or whatever. Main, you can sprint to move an extra action. So kind of similar to 5th edition in that respect, right? The dash action, I think it's called. Attack, catch your breath to make a 2DP recovery roll. So that means you're rolling 2d6, 4, 5s, and 6s are success, but they do not explode. Did I get that right?
Yeah, and it's just to recoup a little bit of vitality in the middle of an action scene.
Right. So if your vitality is going down and you don't want to go, but maybe there's no valuable thing for you to be doing this turn, you can always just kind of basically take a knee for the turn.
Yeah, it's like your second wind.
Yeah, second wind. You can reload if your weapon is empty. You can take cover behind something. You can now make defense checks against ranged attacks from another zone. So, okay, we're getting a little like XCOM here,
That's what I thought too. It's the whole depending on what zone you're in and whether someone has a firearm and whether you have cover or not changes.
Right. So you could imagine, for example. Imagine we're in the storefront, and then the armed goons show up at the front, and the first move action you do is an agility action because you jump to the other side of the bar, right? And then as your action, you take cover behind the bar, and those people are in a different zone because they're outside the store, and they start shooting at you. Now you get defense rolls. I mean, I'm not saying it's not cool or that it doesn't work. I'm just saying it's more crunchy than I thought it would be. I
actually like the way. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I actually like the way that this works better than how cover works in range fire and broken compass, which is a little bit weird.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. Actually, one of my favorite ways that I've actually recently played with cover was Forbidden Lands. So in the way Forbidden Lands works is armor is absorbative, and if you're wearing full plate or stuff like that, you get a certain number of d6 and you roll them. And in Forbidden Lands, only 6s. Your 0 engine, only 6s are success. So for every 6 that you roll, your armor absorbs a point of damage. Well, cover in that game is just, a wooden door, a stone wall. It has a certain number of dice, and usually it's a lot more than armor, So if somebody shoots at you and you're behind a stone wall or whatever like that, that stone wall might have 10 defense dice. And so you get to roll 10 dice to sort of absorb the blow. I thought that was pretty cool. All right. Bonus actions happen directly after main actions only if you have a condition or ability that allows for one. So it's the phantom action that we get from 5th edition as well, but you can still only take one of them. And at the end of your turn, there may be things that happen that trigger at the end of your turn. So basic attack, 1 shot, 1 swing. If you hit the target several times trying to get through its defenses. It rarely consists of 1 shot. It's a montage of sequence, right? You're throwing a bunch of fists. It's not literally one swing of the fist. The exception is when a ranged weapon only allows for 1 shot, such as a javelin or a musket. The multiple swings and shots are abstracted into the basic attack. So we make an attack. It's opposed by their defense. If we're successful, we roll for damage. All right. And if the reload value is basically if the 1's digit is in that range, then the weapon needs to be reloaded.
Yeah, which I think that's cool. It's a very easy way of being you lost count of the bullets.
And if you get bad karma with your shot, not only did you miss, but because you had bad karma, the weapon is jammed and basically is useless for the scene. That's cool. I like that. Again, I like that they're doing a lot of lifting with 1 die roll. Now, you start to become wow, we're doing a lot with this 1 die roll, but I do appreciate it. I mean, the only thing that we need now is something that independently checks the 10's digit. And we can call it something. We can call it something equally abstract, like numerics or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got line of sight, hindered. Basically this is the game's version of that. Like if there's a shooting through a doorway, you get -2 pips. So again, it works very similar to concealment from D20/PF2, in that it's a percent. Essentially, it equates to a percent mischance. Yada yada yada. Attacks. Again, I'm not going to get into all of this, but you're making an attack rolls. Defense is it's an opposed roll between your attack check and their defense check. If a director's character doesn't have a defense score, they don't get to make a defense check. It's kind of a cool way to do minions. Basically, it's just, did you hit with your weapon? Yes. Then I'm not assuming it's just for minions, but it's probably just for minions.
Yeah.
Henchmen, mooks, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, look, we're not bothering with their defense. If you hit them with your roll, you hit them, But yeah, very cool here. And then if you hit them, you roll damage. Now, underlings and mooks. All right. If your attack check has good karma, underlings and mooks go straight to out cold. You may discard the damage roll even after exploded and make a new damage roll. You have to keep the new result. So if you roll basically a critical hit, mooks and underlings are immediately taken out. And if it's anybody else, you can discard. You can get a reroll of your damage roll. If it has bad karma, not only did you miss, but your next check is at -2. And don't forget, anytime you roll karma, good or bad, you get a story point. And we talked about vitality before. This is basically your hit points. If your vitality loss is 0 or less, nothing happens. If it's 1, you reduce it. If it ever reaches 0, you're out cold. Player characters can take the wounded or mortal peril conditions instead of vitality loss. So it sounds like this is basically your way of saying, like, I'm willing to risk death here. Just keep fighting.
And it's a way for the villain to not be taken out, but possibly limping on to come back and cause trouble later.
Okay. Out cold means you're no longer in the fight. You're usually unconscious, but you may have been thrown off a cliff into the sea or out of a window or fallen through a trap door or whatever. So you're out. There's no like coming back into the scene, it sounds like. You're not just out, you're out. So player characters can take wounded and mortal peril. Unimportant characters cannot. Mooks and underlings. Lieutenant director characters, lieutenants can take the wounded, and boss characters can take mortal peril. They don't have to. They may be taken prisoners and wait for an opportune moment to try to escape. So wounded is an option for players and for somewhat more important bosses, which is they can take the wounded condition instead of vitality loss. They don't have to, but they can choose to avoid being knocked out cold. Being wounded will have consequences later, and it sticks around for some times. Once you're wounded, all of your task checks are at -2 pips. So you basically have a 20% failure chance on everything when you're wounded.
Yeah, that reminds me very much of like the Rollmaster VSD.
Yeah.
Where the wounds linger for a really long time, and it's not something you necessarily want to have.
But it's important to note that this is a player choice, right? So if you would be knocked out cold, instead you can choose to be wounded. So it's
and you can even turn it around, choose to fail, get captured, and you benefit from that.
Right.
This is like, why are you fighting to the bitter end here if you already, if you're losing this fight and you're outnumbered or whatever.
Right.
You could be rewarded by choosing to just surrender or get captured or whatever.
And they make this very clear here with this note that even if someone shoots you with a gun and inflicts lots of vitality loss, there is no harm, no wounds, no blood, unless you take the wounded condition, right? So you are choosing when your character wants to be hit and hurt. Mortal perils can take the mortal peril condition instead of vitality loss. This is not mandatory. If you take the mortal peril conditions, you can flip attack checks at will for the rest of the scene, but it comes at a cost. If you run out of vitality, you are not out cold. You are dead. So basically you go into Super Saiyan mode. You basically get 2 bites at every apple. You can flip all your checks for the rest of the entire scene. But you're basically, this is the equivalent of, raising the death flag, like I'm willing to go out. I'm in that, final section of my death spiral, right? Where I'm a badass, but if it goes bad, it's
this is a, you guys get out of here, I'll hold them off moment
right,
for your character.
Awesome. Very cool. So it talks here about, sacrifice and the aforementioned martyr thing and killing. And even unimportant characters from the director, the GM, are rarely killed. Think about all these movies. Very rarely do they kill people, right? Again, it's part of that genre emulation. But also, look at this. I don't know if this is an optional rule or not. Remove all story points from a character that kills in cold blood, plus half from those characters that could have stopped it but didn't. So this is like old school alignment penalties from AD&D First Edition, Ben, this is a pretty hard slap and saying like, I'm going to punish you if you're going to kill somebody.
Yeah, and this 7C has a similar thing as well with corruption points, where it's that's not what the game is doing. Right. So the game will reinforce that with penalties.
Yeah, you do not kill GM characters who give up. If you are tired of the arc enemy always escaping from jail to appear in the next adventure, talk to the director instead and ask for the arc enemy to be put away for good. But do not kill the villain. This is just not the way that things work in these stories. And I know that there's...
Can we get him to send to some prisoner in Zurich where there's like no chance of escaping?
And I know that this rubs some people the wrong way because they view RPGs as sort of like this ultimate, I don't want to have any restrictions. Ultimate freedom. I should be able to do whatever I want. And I personally do not ascribe to that. I think that some games are here to tell a particular type of story, and I actually support that completely. All right, so we have a very detailed combat example, again with those very beautiful dice. Maybe it's just like the red and the white and the Comic Sans font. It just looks so comic-y. I love it. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I do want to touch on conditions. So conditions kind of sound like D20 conditions here. We got blinded, fire, deaf, exhausted, frightened, intoxicated. And in most cases, these are giving you negative pips. And these can stack. So potentially you might be in a situation where you have like -4 pips or something and you're failing 40% of the time. So that could be pretty brutal. And some information about, of course, timed bombs going off and sticks of dynamite and bomb traps, from other places, not just from fighting, stuff about poison and the like. And then lastly, we talked about story points. So we talked about this before. You can have up to 12. You start with 4. The director may say you start with the same amount from the previous session if you ended in a cliffhanger. I like that. That's a nice touch. Of course, you can use beads, chips, coins, and other tokens, which of course we would. The main principle is that you get story points for introducing twists in the story that are not to your advantage. This encourages players to play on their characters' weaknesses, which adds to the story and makes it more fun. And I know there's a lot of role-player games out there who will balk at this. And you are right to, if you are playing your game as sort of a game as competition. I'm trying to beat the GM is a referee, they're a judge, they're impartial. And introducing this kind of mechanic is very, I think, anathema to that kind of style of play. 100%, I agree. But when you want these kind of fun comic book genre moments, we want the unpredictability of the game, but we also want to encourage it. Because if we had the game session where it's like, I always say, if you play D20, it's like, we never missed and everybody hit and we killed all the monsters and they never threatened us and we got all the treasure and it was the easiest session ever. There are some people who would look at that from a D&D as like, that was the best session of all time. If you were playing a game like this, though, you would view that as a complete failure. Because you're like, no, we're here for the twists and the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. That's what we came here for. And this ensures that it happens and puts you as a player in the driver's seat, which makes it feel very different when you're the one launching the slings and arrows at your character.
Yeah, and it's a great idea in that respect too, because I find that players will often create for themselves much harder situations than the GM ever will.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. I mean, I haven't played a lot of Fabula Ultima, but, considering that you die in that game when you sacrifice, you choose to die. I'm willing to bet that most people feel way better about their character deaths in that game than they would in a standard D20 game, because you feel empowered in that perspective. What's up, Spider-Man? It has been too long for there. Anon says it's a core tenet in Marvel face rip as well. Yeah, this is just this is not just superhero 101, but it's just part of that kind of core ethic of the game. So how do we get karma? Well, one time it's just random. If you are, how do we get story points? You roll karma, you get story points. So 10% of the time, you're going to get a story point. 9 points if you get captured, right? So this is the game bribing you to just give up. When you bust in the room and you're trying to, I would say hack into the computer, but they probably didn't hack it. It's the vast data banks of the mainframe, and you're trying to
punch cards.
Yeah, you're trying to hack the punch cards and the 500,000 feet of magnetic data tape. And the bad guy busts in, and there's 30 people with guns pointed at you. That's not initiative. That's where you just go, okay, the GM's taking us hard to the next scene. We're going to take our bribe. We're going to get our 9 points, and we go hands up.
Yeah, you actually have that. You raise a good point. I hadn't even thought of this before, but that really is a hard move.
Yes.
That's a hard move from the GM. You get rewarded for it.
Right.
But it's the GM pulling a hard move.
Right.
saying, this is us, we're cutting.
Right.
here.
We're cutting. We're going to the next scene, and again, I think it's going to make for the better story, and it's maybe even a way to be like, and I want to bust you guys up with a bunch of story points so you guys can kick ass in the last moments of the scene.
Yeah, you could even couch it. Go, what you're doing, breaking into their data banks is very, very risky.
Right.
And if you get caught, the odds of you getting caught, if you do one thing wrong, the alarm's going to trigger because it's based off of like body temperature or something. And if you get nervous and your temperature raises even by like 2%, well, this would be Celsius. 2 degrees Celsius, the sensor will pick it up, and immediately you're going to have 50 guards on you.
Right.
Because the room is so sensitive, and they have already bought into that.
Right. Yep.
And they're like, okay, the chances are we're going to get caught, but we have to try.
Right. And even then, in the back of their mind, they're going, if we do it, I get 9 points. I mean, come on, that's.
Well, that's the thing too. They can immediately go, well, can I spend 2 story points and say that my character cut, piece of the tape that they needed, and they have it stuffed in their pocket or something.
Right.
Sure, why not?
Right. Or the better one, they pass the test. Then they get 2 story points by choosing to fail it so that the alarm does go off so that they do get captured, so they get 9 points. And in one
they have
go,
the cake and eat it too.
and in one go, you gain 11 points.
Yeah.
and that's something too that I think people fail to notice in these story type games. There's still a game there. It's just not the game that you're used to playing. The game now becomes, how do we, oh man, what's the best way to tell this story so that I get the most ahead? It's still a challenge to the player. It's more of a challenge of, how do I lean into these tropes? How do we, and if the system is set up well, right, by doing those things, you're going to become by doing the things that will mechanically reward you, it will produce the kind of story that you all wanted, signed up to play. So we talked about before, if you fail purposely and put yourself in a bind, you get 2 points. If you use one of your complications and activate it, you get 3 or 6 points. If you take yourself out of the scene entirely, aka I was at the bar getting drunk, I didn't show up. And then lastly, entertainment. Don't overuse this option. It's often the least, it's not entertaining to hog the limelight all the time, but the director can, at their discretion, award you a story point anytime that you should do something that's awesome. And in fact, any player can at any time suggest that another player should be awarded a story point in case the director forgets. That's a great line. I love doing that stuff, especially, it's 10 times better when a player calls out another person's awesome. Like, dude, that was awesome. You should, get a story point.
I think so too. When someone does something, you're just like, that was just super clever. And someone goes, you should be rewarded for that. And then everyone can onboard that.
Yeah. And I shortcut it. What I typically do in these type of games that have these kind of effects, I will put a little bowl. I usually use poker chips for hero points or story points, I guess, in this game. I would put a little candy dish in the middle of the table, and I'll seed it, with 5 or 6 points. And I basically say, you can't take one for yourself, but you don't even have to ask my permission. If somebody did something awesome, reach in there, grab one, give it to them. And I think
I like that idea. 7C and Burning Wheel both do something really similar, where if you're aiding, you take your die and you put your die in the middle of the table. It's got to be a different color, like red or something.
Yes.
And then that person can pick it up and roll it. And in 7C, you could do the same thing, where you could take one of your raises and create an opportunity, which literally is, you are taking on your raise count, you're taking your raise, you're putting it in the table and letting someone else pick that up and use it. Especially if there's a duel going on or something, like being able to be like, oh yeah, how much narrative currency can we give the main attraction here?
All right, so now we get to the final thing that I wanted to cover. The only thing we probably won't get to is equipment, but I think we can understand that in the context of this game, having the right equipment lets you, apply pips.
It adds 2 pips.
Yeah, add 2 pips, and you can even see here, like if you're trying to build a gadget and it's affecting all your pips. But I did want to see how much narrative control the players have, and then we've talked about story points. We know you can spend 2 story points to flip a die roll, so you can turn a 91 into a 19. But what else can you use story points? All right. So for 1 story point, you can flip a task check for certain skills, the ones that you have that are connected to your abilities. For 2 story points, you can change a failed task check for certain skills into a success. Again, these are all tied to your ability, right? So it depends on what ability you have. But abilities are like your special powers, your feats, the thing that you're really good at. And for 4 points, you can activate a major ability. So these are all your core abilities are empowered by story points. They're not empowered by the gods or magic. It's empowered by your ability to interface with the narrative. The players that interface more with the narrative and lead to more interesting outcomes are going to be able to do more cool things. All right, so that's the first thing. Second, flip a check, 2 points. We saw that. Third thing, getting gadgets. You start with 5 gear kits, but they may not be the ones that you need. To gain access to other gear kits, you may have to spend story points. Interesting. So spend story points to basically kind of have kind of a virtual inventory is what I'm reading.
Kind of, yeah. And for example, in here, there's an example where they have to break into, to where the villain is like a really fancy dinner at a museum that's taking place. And the race car driver goes, well, my credit rating is kind of low, so I can't afford the kind of dress that would be needed for this. And he goes, well, you can spend the story points. And she, I think, ends up through a reporter contact, meeting a designer who then they either loan her a dress or something like that for that scene. But she has to spend currency to do it because it'd be like, yeah, you don't own any Versace. You're not going to be able to get in. So in order to get Versace, you can spend the hero points, or the same would be like, in order to get like a nice car to be able to drive in a particular scene. I think in one, it was like the requisition a helicopter for one thing. So like they're way out, like we said, their mini sub goes away, but like we know the island they're going to. We can spend story points and let's get a news helicopter.
Right, because let's be clear, this is not a game that doesn't want the heroes to be able to track down the mini sub, right?
Exactly.
Like, it's not like a challenge to you, like, oh, can you solve this problem? Did you build your characters well enough? It's like, no, actually, we didn't build our characters well enough. We can't track this mini sub. So yeah, I'm going to spend these 2 bullshit story points so that we can keep the game going. Mm-hmm. And like, I view that as very much a strength, not a weakness, because this is not a game where you want to be like, well, you guys suck and you built your characters badly, and well, now you're stuck here, and I guess they'll get away, and the bad guys nuke the world. I don't know what to tell you. That's the way it happens. The dice fell as they may.
Exactly, the dice told a story.
Yeah, right. Which again is a fine way to play, but not what this game is deliberately trying to do. All right, so now we get into the stuff that'll really make people's heads spin. Get a clue. For 1 to 4 points. The director will give you a clue. Most of the time it costs 1, but to get better clues, you have to spend more. The option is great to use while captured. Spend up to 4 story points to have Graf von Zadrith gloat about his evil plan, if he's not already doing it on his own. So very, this is a classic, deep narrative thing where it's like, hey, I don't know what's going on. My player character doesn't know what's going on, but we want to move the story forward. Mm-hmm. And that's what's most important to us here. It's not about, are we smart enough or can we roll well enough? We're all here to sort of participate in this ongoing narrative. So I'd appreciate it if you could give me some help. Then we get to adding something minor for 2 points, major for 6 points. And this is the classic, your best friend shows up on the scene at the last, major twist. The person that was sent to kill you used to work with him back at the old spy. He hesitates and he goes, Sergey, and it's this, it's the classic. It's what you see in every single one of these movies and comic books for all time.
Yes.
And I find it to be awesome because that is where you really see what a player is capable of, right? When you really get to see.
I love it. You're just taking the reins, you're handing it to the players, and go, here you go ham, guys. You have the pool. You have the points. You have the ability to do this. Don't let my idea or my framework inhibit you. This is where the GM is creating putting basically like almost a watercolor. It's a basic scene, basic layout, few moving parts, and then letting the players determine where it's going to go. And if the players, aren't digging it, you move on to the next thing. You just keep it moving.
Yeah, and I've used this example before, but with the patrons, I ran an Avatar game last year at Origins for a group of people, and somebody was trying to escape from some Fire Nation soldiers. They ducked down an alley, and then they rolled low. And so I was like, he's like, well, I'm going to get caught. And I was like, I don't really want to combat or get caught. So I was like, as he's going down the hall, suddenly one of the doors opens and a hand emerges from the shadow, grabs him and pulls him back into the thing and closes the door. And everyone was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And they're like, wait a second, how did Derek know that? I was like, no, I literally told them, I said, I have no idea who that was. I just know that somebody grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him into the darkness before the thing came. And the player who got pulled into the darkness was like, oh, what if it's my dad? And I was like, yes, it is your father. He's here and he wants to know what you're doing here. He said, I told you to stay at home with your mother and your daughter or your sisters. What are you doing here? I told you not to get mixed up in this, like this rebellion, blah, blah, blah. He's like, Dad, I'm not a kid anymore. And they were just like, fighting back and forth. And he's like, you have to trust me, anyway. But the player, I remember, felt so empowered because they thought they were just joking around, like, oh, the GM has some master plan. I was like, dude, I don't have a plan. Your idea is just as valid, maybe even more so than mine. And I love seeing what people can do with this. And when again, I'm not gonna lie, you gotta have some high quality players. Like when I play with someone like Aaron Smith, All right. He, he's a storyteller. He's chomping at the bit to do this. He's going to add stuff and I'm going to go, man, I would never thought of that in a million years. That is so fucking rad. And I love it. It makes it, again, I always say the player's main goal should be to entertain me, the game master. And this really lets them sort of do that and take off the chain. So I'm a big fan of that. Very, very, very cool there. And so again, great description of how they might use that and sort of, break apart this. Losing story points. So never remove story points for acting against your plans, right? Don't punish them because they didn't do what you're supposed to. They didn't do what you were supposed to do. Never remove story points to punish a player for behaving badly in real life. You know what? If they're obnoxious, that's a separate problem. Don't try to fix it with game behavior. Just deal with it or whatever. And then we talked about how if you kill unnecessarily or in cold blood, and this is a very strongly worded by not basically saying you cannot do this, but it is the game's way of saying if you are going to do this, that is going to have major consequences for you in the game. Very cool. And again, we said we talk about gear, but the last thing is how you level up. Remember, we mentioned you make ticks whenever you use a skill relevant. And for each tick skill that you used, you can make an experience check. You can put a tick towards learning a language, or you can put a tick towards gaining one of those new abilities. And looks like it's kind of like the BRP Dragonbane, where you roll D percentage and you have to roll greater than your skill. In other words, if your skill's really low, it's very easy to improve. If your skill gets high, it's very difficult to lose or to improve, because if your skill's 80, you need to roll an 81 or higher on D percentage. And if you succeed, you add D6 to your old skill and increase it by the new value. And if you roll lower, the skill is not increased. Either way, remove the tick in the checkbox. This is why I need a new computer and a new audio interface, people. What I was saying is it crazy to, like, with that kind of thing, to that kind of experience point thing where you roll the level up, to instead do it like something like where it's like, if you succeed, if you roll higher, your skill goes up by D6 plus 1 or something like that. If you fail, it just goes up by 1. I hate the idea of like somebody can like literally just never improve it, and it just feels like such a wasted experience point. Whereas like if you're at 80 and it's like, okay, 81, 82, 83. I don't know. That's just my sort of take on it, because that's one of the advantages. You don't have that in Dragonbane because it's too much. It's 5% increments. But then when you have a D percentage, you have so many percent. It's like getting 1% already kind of feels like a loss. So I don't know.
I don't know, because with the way pips work, you're not really rewarding them per se.
Well, true, but
because their overall success is going up, but also their odds of failure go up with it as well, depending on how difficult. Because it doesn't matter how skillful you are; it's how difficult is the task you're trying to do.
Well, so that puts it in interesting perspective, because that almost, to me, suggests that having an 80 or an 81 is worse than having a 79.
It depends on the kind of story you want to tell with your character.
Well, I'm saying
failing with the higher number. Remember, it's a more dramatic result.
But I'm saying, but from a pips perspective, right? So if I have -4 pips, right?
Oh, you're better off having a 55 than you are having a 71.
Yeah, that's
I think. It could, now you really, I mean, you could get down to the nitty gritty and be like,
someone do the simulation. Someone's
got to run 10 million rolls.
Yeah, 10 million rolls
with every, percentage
every
and with plus and minus 3 pips across the board, and see what is the most, how does that work out on a probability? But it feels like you're better off having a higher ones place and not necessarily a higher tens place. But once again, it comes down to the difficulty what you're trying to do and how the GM is tuning it with those pips.
Yeah.
Because if you have kit that you're always using and the GM doesn't really ever apply negative pips,
right,
then you want to lower one's place in your skill.
Yeah. Zipperfest says, so is character improvement being left up to RNG? Yeah, for the most part.
Yes, which a lot of skill-based games do.
Yeah,
especially D100 ones.
Yeah, Dragonbane does that. I know Call of Cthulhu does that.
Yeah, the key is you succeed, you tick a thing, you get a chance, and then you do it again, and you just have that happen a lot, as opposed to milestones or some other.
Right. I think the key things to note is, number one, you're not like doing anything. You just have to use the skill. Number two, it happens every session in this game. So, like, you're not, yes, it is random, but it's also like all it's asking you to do is use the skills. The other thing is it kind of also encourages you to use a variety of skills, because that way you get multiple rolls, right? If you're like, I'm only going to use drive every single time. Well, that's great. You used it and used it in a meaningful way, but you still only get one check. There's only one checkbox. It's not like you get multiple rolls. It also means that there's a kind of an incentive for you to sometimes be like, hey, look, I'm not that good at this skill, but I kind of want to use it in a meaningful way and find a way to use it in a meaningful way, because I'm very likely to improve it,
And if you fail or you roll karma, you get story points. It once again, it feeds into telling an interesting story, because you're always going to get more. You will get more interesting outcomes out of failure than you will necessarily out of success.
Right.
I mean, you could tell a great story succeeding, but I mean, there's only so many times you can succeed, and this game is made not to have you fail per se, but it's made to create interesting outcomes.
Right. Exactly. It's an interesting outcome generator, right?
Yeah.
It's not interested in simulating some sort of maximal probabilistic. And again, there's a lot of players who really struggle with this idea of playing a game not to beat it, right? But to make the best story. That's the challenge of the game.
Yeah, and this really is basically a story game until you get to the combat.
Yeah.
Where it stops everything, freezes, it breaks down, and it gets a little gamey.
And I know that, that's interesting you say that, because that is how Smith had a really hard time with Legend of the Five Rings for that reason. He felt like the game was very, narrative focused, and how my character's feeling and the strife building up. And sure, there were still dice rolls. It was still mechanical, but then we would get into a conflict scene, and suddenly it felt like we were playing kind of almost a separate game. There was an initiative roll, and people were in zones and had, different weapon stances. And it while it felt very connected to the rest of the game, it did feel like a very different play experience.
Yeah, I felt the same thing. To me, it feels like it's a very drastic gear shift in that game, because you have a narrative scene in which there are no rolls at all, or it's a conflict.
Yeah.
There's no in between. It's either a conflict or a narrative. That's it. And that period, that transition between the two, is very sudden. It's almost like turbulence on a plane. It's like a doom. You drop and you're now here. Yeah. In this game, it's a little bit smoother, because during those narrative things, you're spending currencies and you're constantly doing things. For example, in L5R, I could be wrong, but you can't just spend an opportunity outside of a conflict, right?
No, you can.
You can. So you bank those opportunities?
No, they're on the dice rolls. So
yeah,
if you're in a narrative
it has
scene,
to be part of a conflict. Then you can't do it during a narrative.
No, you can make you make dice rolls during narrative scenes.
No, by the rules as written under narrative scenes, there are no dice rolls. When you roll dice, it becomes one of three types of conflict.
No.
It's either a social conflict, a combat conflict, or some other type.
Yeah, you're thinking of skirmish, intrigue, duel, and mass combat. But no. You totally can make checks outside of conflict. Totally.
I don't think so.
No, you definitely can.
We'll
talk offline.
It says in the rules, a narrative, when you roll dice, you must move to a conflict.
I would love. I myself have never seen that, and definitely
the only reason is because it stood out so strong to me.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that was misinterpreted by you, because again, like
it could be. I would love to be educated. Yeah. You know way more about than I do.
I mean, that's saying something, but I mean, I haven't played, but I do know that the people who play the game, like on Twitch and
I'm not saying people don't play it that way.
No,
I'm saying what the letter of the rules is in the book.
Yeah.
But I'll show you the paragraph, and you could tell me.
Yeah, because I think the book even gives an example of somebody shooting a bow and killing a guard in a narrative scene. So,
yeah, that I don't know, but I'll show you where I'll show you what I saw.
All right. See, this is why you need to join Night's Last Call. So you can debate the minutia of Samurai Bushido drama games. Okay, so again, my goal in First Looks is never to review a game, but it's certainly to appreciate, what is a game about? Well, this game was very clear about stating what it's about. And then it asked the question, okay, so how does a game let you do that? And I think it does, because it has especially these narrative meta currencies that allow you to sort of build that stuff up. The third question is, what are the rewards that incentivize a player? Now, I will freely admit that the reward play cycle seems a little bit murky, right? Because you kind of just use your skills and then you get to roll from that. I mean, Anon was mentioning just so you roll randomly, or Zipperfist was saying so you roll randomly. There's not as clear of a character progression, obviously within a session, if you give up, if you use your complications, you're going to get more story points, which is going to let you, have more agency in the sense of the session, but it doesn't really have necessarily this kind of, character incentive progression concept.
Yeah, it's not that kind of game. It's not the kind of game where you are shooting for a mechanical outcome for your character. Like, I want to get to this level so that I can unlock this ability. Right. This is more, I want to tell this kind of story.
And my biggest experience for this is with games like Mutants Masterminds, which had a hero point mechanic, and it was one of our first narrative hero point mechanics. And basically, it set up, this is a superhero game, but it set up a situation where in the beginning part of the session, and hero points did not carry over from session to session, and there wasn't really a mechanical advancement. It doesn't have XP or, Fate or Persona or Artha or whatever. It didn't have any of that stuff. The main mechanic of the game was earning hero points. Well, why? Because basically the superheroes would, trouble would strike them, complications would happen. Oh my God, it's a bus full of children. Oh my God, it's my girlfriend. Oh my God, it's, my mom's at the bank that's being attacked. Oh no, they're going to discover my secret identity. Of course, they have kryptonite bullets. It was, and a lot of it was driven by the players, because that would build them up this bank of hero points. So that at the end of the game, when in a movie situation, when you're in a D&D situation, this should be when they're at their weakest, with their minimum number of hit points and all their spells are expended. But somehow in the shows, this is always when they're their strongest and they overcome the biggest challenge. And it's because in the game, you get to that final scene or two, and you're sitting on a bank of 10 hero points that you've been building up through adversity and through leaning into comic book tropes the whole session. And now you get to kick ass and unload and use all your really awesome, cool, powerful abilities and never miss and just, take them out. And so that was sort of the play pattern. You got rewarded for being a hero, not by being like, you'll advance faster, you'll progress faster, but by getting sort of to feel like at the end of the session, you got to kind of kick ass. And, I found it to be it worked very well for me, but not for all my players, because I did have players in my group who struggled with the idea of self-sabotaging. And so they wouldn't earn those hero points. And so they would get to the final scene. And then instead of being a badass hero who's kicking ass and taking names, they were kind of, they got their asses kicked. And so for them, it was a little bit more of a struggle, because I could argue they weren't playing the game very well, right? Because they should be leaning into the tropes of superheroes so that they can then be a superhero at the end of the film or the end of the episode. Same thing's here true. So it changes. You're still asked to beat the game. What that means is something different, though.
Right. Yeah, and I find with strict skill games like this, and more in that story game aspect, your character mechanically isn't going to change very drastically over the source of a campaign. Maybe they'll pick up one extra ability, or maybe a couple of their skills, what they're most competent in might go up a little bit, but they're not going to fundamentally change mechanically. But story-wise, because of the plot hooks, they might change entirely. Entirely different.
So, obviously it's kind of a loaded question because you're playing Troubleshooters right now. But, you have, in the last couple X whatever, that we've covered Broken Compass in the last year, now Troubleshooters. And of course, there's the ever perennial Savage Worlds, right? There's even Hollow Earth Expeditions, which I know that I turned you on to. So in terms of that action adventure drama game, which of those do you like the most right now, today?
Yeah, so I would say depends on what you're trying to do. If you want the game that is probably going to move just absolute fastest, and it's so easy to pick up overall, Broken Compass.
AKA Outgunned.
Ungunned, yeah, but by a pretty large margin.
Okay.
If you understand the tropes and can lean into it, you have a group that can lean into it really well, you just cannot beat it. what I like about this game that I don't think Broken Compass can do is this tells a very specific type of story. For example, you can't play The Saint or Johnny Quest really using Broken Compass. It's not made for that. It's the Lara Croft. It's the Uncharted, the Indiana Jones, those types of things. This is more the Ocean's 11, Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, like that kind of thing. It's has a very different flavor to it. And I love the cleanliness of this game though, where it has enough, it's simple, but it has enough things where it's got a little bit of crunch, but also everything is very cleanly explained. It's nice and neat. But of course, they can't tell you how to create narrative and stuff like that. That's a story game mechanic. That's something you just have to feel it out. But it gives you so many touchstones. It's hard to not know what they're leaning towards. So once again, I hate to say it, but it depends on the game. It depends on the situation. I would say of all of those games, like Hex is by far the hardest one. That would probably be towards the bottom of that list just because of the binomial dice and all that stuff. It just makes it crazy. And it's also very trad by today's standards. But I would still put Broken Compass way up there. But I would give this one, I would say it's worth a fair shake. I wouldn't say it's better than. I find them, they both have different strengths. And I haven't played this one enough to be like, it's I prefer it to it.
Right.
I don't think at the end of the day I will, because I never laughed as much as I did when we played Broken Compass. It was just so gonzo all the time, and everyone just had a complete blast doing it.
Right. Yeah.
But in its desire to be pithy, Outgunned leaves some stuff on the cutting room floor that gives you a little bit of work as a GM. Out.
And I think that sometimes, some amount of complexity and some amount of, taking your time to really, chew the fat, so to speak, it can be very powerful because it lets people sort of, mechanics give you something to hang your imaginative hat on a little bit, and sometimes the lack of a mechanic or something being too, zany and fast paced, it can leave you feeling a little like there's nothing here. We're standing on a vapor. We're building a house a house on quicksand.
Yeah, but I would say the other, if like on a tie, this triangle, and it all spins around each other depending on what you're trying to do. 7C has to be part of that conversation as well.
Yeah,
and 7C is very much a story game, and you need to have not a big group for that, a smaller group, because otherwise,
yet another alternate. Yet another alternate Europe game.
Yeah,
Ben.
Another very thinly veiled.
That's your jam, Ben.
European high octane story game type of a thing.
Yes.
But it definitely deserves a place at the table too. So it depends. What's your flavor? Do you want to play modern or golden age era or Jules Verne era style, like pulpy action type stuff? Outgunned. No question about it. Do you want it to be more of a heisty thriller kind of a thing? Troublemakers, or potentially even Feng Shui, or possibly even Leverage, the RPG, the honorable mentions. But if you're doing swashbuckling, I mean, 7C, hands down.
There you go. From the mouth of the master. Well, I don't have a whole lot there to add, other than this has been the last year or so. I've gotten more and more familiar with D100 systems, and it's really interesting when I see people that are doing interesting things with them. Again, I think I kickstarted Broken Empires just because it looked like he's really trying to combine some different ideas and do some different things. And this game clearly is using it. I love the swapping thing; is I think a really fun thing. It's very empowering, and without it feels to me better than Advantage, even if it's kind of fundamentally the same thing. You're basically getting 2 rolls out of 1, but it's a fun little empowering. The Pips is horribly named, but easy enough to grok once you start playing it for a while.
Agreed. That's a misnomer.
But maybe it's a language thing, a translation thing. I don't know. But or maybe D10s in France are they just have
maybe they do have like a spider-eyed
10 little pips on it. But But yeah, I wanna thank Ben for being on with us today and helping me understand the game. I think your insight helped a lot. And thank all of you for hanging out with us tonight and asking some cool questions and following along. And yeah, and if you want to be part of these conversations, you want to ask Ben how his Troubleshooters campaign is going, then make sure to check us out at patreon.com/nightslastcall. You can be part of the Night's Last Call Discord. You can get out over to the other games section where Ben, I'm sure, will be discussing the game in detail amongst the many hundreds of games that he plays every year. Do you have a count as we come into the end game here?
No, and it's funny because I have to do this business trip, so I won't be able to do my tally until next week. And I'll be doing my year-end, I base it off the Ennies where I do my year-end product of the year, best design, best art, best rule set, all that kind of stuff.
But definitely over 100.
Ballparking? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Probably over 150, easy.
And how many unique, distinct systems in that?
Well, this was the year I really tried to pare that down. So I'd have to count, but it's probably, and Boothby might actually have me beat. But it's probably about 15 or 16.
15 or 16 distinct systems.
That I've never played before.
150.
Probably 15 or 16 is my guess. When I do my final tally, I'll know for sure, but that's my gut feeling.
Boothby says, I do not have you beat. So there you go. The greatest player of all time concedes defeat. So thank you, Thaddeus, and thank you, Jackal, for hanging out. Thank you, Zipperfist, for hanging out and for the insight here. Locanor says, glad to have caught a stream. I'll hopefully be back next year in KLLC. Well, Locanor, we were just talking about you.
I was literally asking to make sure that you're okay. So I'm glad to see that you're around because I was like, Locanor, where'd he go?
You literally did ask that. And London had to do a little sleuthing and found his kind of like, hey, I gotta take a little step back and I'll be back hopefully in the future. So Locanor, you are gone but not forgotten. We'd love to have you back. Boothby says, I am the best player, not the best GM. Well, Boothby, playing and running both count as a game, but running that many games is pretty crazy stuff. So Ben is the undisputed master, and we're happy to have him as part of our community. And well, Locanor, I hope you all the best, and I hope you get better and you be gaming again with us soon. And
yeah, good luck for sure.
Good luck with all that. As for the rest of you, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Ben, for being a part of this. We'll be back Thursday, where we're going to be doing our final Pathfinder 2 remaster stream. We're going to
fire up the hate machine.
Yeah, we've managed to get hate comments on every single stream. So it's great when I what I love about these streams. They don't get as many views. It's true. But everyone's like, "Wow, this was really cool. Thanks for sharing this. Wow, those are some really cool insights. Really appreciate it. Wow, Ben knows so much." Then you go and do a Pathfinder 2 stream, and that's when the haters come in. And they're like,
"Oh yeah,
these assholes don't know."
What a bunch of jerks!
Yeah, what a bunch of jerks. These elitist assholes don't know what they're talking about. I've played 5 games of Pathfinder 2. I think I know what my with more money, more problems. That's what they say. So it's all good stuff. But anyways, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Night's the Last Call.
Thanks everyone. Good night.
Peace.